Chapter 626, A Worthless Person in Imposing Attire, 310 Crystals. When Zhang Chen saw Zhu Weiang putting the bag of crystals on the table, his mouth twitched and he resisted the urge to laugh. This was equivalent to a poor man asking a rich man, "Do you want to make $10? Seeing as Zhang Chen had no reaction, Zhu Weiang was silent before he took back the sack of crystals. "Please consider it carefully. If you're willing to help us with this small favor, you'll gain the friendship of the president." The advisor of the Federation courteously bowed before departing. Zhang Chen deliberated the words of the advisor before making the decision not to execute Ji Yukan. The guy was quite unlucky. He thought the people from the Federation were there to save him, but it wasn't a ransom they brought. Instead, it was money to purchase his coffin. It was also the president's executive order. News of the destruction of the water treatment plant thugs quickly spread. The local survivors all exercised enough caution toward the mysterious but powerful foreign organization, NAC. It was only when they discovered that NAC had no other motives and just built walls below the airship that they started to loosen up. The Boulder villages sent their men out and attempted to approach the camp. When they confirmed they weren't under attack, the local survivors started to interact with the soldiers in kinetic skeletons. They had to do that because of the sudden spike in the tribute. Their water supply had been cut for a long time, while they were close to the Gan River. The water in the wasteland wasn't drinkable. This was due to the greenish-yellow cloud in the air. Without the ability to access purified water from the water treatment plant, they could only hope they had powerful stomachs to supplement the meager amount of distilled water. "We're hoping you could open the water valve of the water treatment plant. Our village has lost access to water for half a month." "Of course, we'll pay." An elder in a gray jacket handed Zhang Chen a bug containing only a few crystals as he carefully asked Zhang Chen. He was the representative elected by the nearby village, the mayor of Hamster Village. "What's your name?" Zhang Chen didn't take the stuffed bag. Instead, he looked into the cloudy eyes of the old man. "Zhu Beijin," the elder replied prudently. "Okay, Zhu Beijin." Zhang Chen smiled. "Tell your villagers that NAC has occupied the water treatment plant. I don't need your crystals. If you want water, swear your allegiance." Zhang Chen handed him the NAC economic autonomous policy to him, sent him outside the military outpost and watched him escorted by two men with hunting rifles. While the rural area didn't have a lot of zombies, there were dangerous mutants here, like Deathclaws for example. An elder without any combat ability wouldn't have come alone. Sun Ziru stood beside Zhang Chen and asked curiously, "Will they agree?" "They have no reason to reject." Zhang Chen laughed. "Our proposed conditions could be described as heaven-sent." NAC collected no taxes on agricultural products in the economic zone, and the governance of the economic zone was based on a mix of local governance and supervising representative. "Is it?" With her finger on her lips, Sun Ziru smiled. "Speaking of which, brother-in-law, don't forget the primary purpose of this trip, Fallout Shelter 071, I know." Zhang Chen tousled Ziru's luscious hair. Sun Ziru closed her eyes while enjoying the warmth of his big hand. "Brother-in-law isn't mad at me, right?" "Mad at you?" "In the morning, I purposely shot that female raider." "I know." Zhang Chen didn't understand. "Didn't you feel pity?" Sun Ziru tilted her head. "Pity? She's the leader of a force. Did you not fantasize about humiliating her in front of her subordinates and enjoying the expression on her face?" Sun Ziru said all this with an innocent expression. "I'm not that monstrous." Zhang Chen face-palmed. "Eh?" Sun Ziru covered her mouth and made a surprised expression. "Ha ha, sorry, I'll make it up to you tonight." Seeing as Zhang Chen didn't say anything, Ziru patted him on the shoulder with a grin. Zhang Chen really couldn't scold her when she had such innocent-looking eyes. While the water treatment plant was abandoned for many years, most of the equipment inside was operating autonomously. However, when Zhang Chen attempted to open the water valve, he discovered the valve was stuck. After conducting an investigation with the drone, they discovered that below the membrane of the tank were the eggs of a mud crab, and the location of the valve happened to be clogged with the corpse of a mud crab. Mud crabs were extremely difficult to deal with and posed a higher threat than death claws in tight quarters. The sharp claws could even sever steel, as they had a sturdy shell comparable to steel. With such a natural advantage, they didn't want to eat detritus anymore and began to feast on any living creatures approaching them. Based on the few bodies in the water, the raiders hadn't purposely hiked the prices. That was their temporary solution because they couldn't deal with the crabs. Under the command of Wang Zhou, 10 soldiers in kinetic skeletons entered the water tank, accompanied by 2 soldiers with flamethrowers and a few hummingbird drones to engage in fierce battle with the mud crabs. Reality soon proved that the mud crabs were far more difficult to deal with compared to the water treatment plant thugs who only bullied civilians. With hard shells, they weren't afraid of bullets and even forced the NAC team to retreat a few times. Jiang Chen then ordered the soldiers to unload a few combustion missiles from the airship. They stuck aluminum heating agents to them and dropped them with drones. The gate was shut tight. With the drones in position, Jiang Chen unleashed the missiles. What happened was obvious. When the soldiers broke through the scorching steel gate, the boiling water vapor burst out from the edges of the door and carried the aroma of cooked crabs. When the temperature cooled down, a few brave ones jumped inside with a net and took out the curled mud crabs. There were 30 in total. This made the food-loving soldiers particularly ecstatic. The logistics team on the airship was comprised of a few chefs who worked in the fishbone cafeteria. Since they killed so many mud crabs that couldn't be preserved for long, Jiang Chen ordered the chefs to set up a few giant pots in the middle of the campground, to the cheers of the soldiers. Along with a few boxes of alcohol taken from the water treatment plant, the soldiers enjoyed a nice treat. Mud crabs were one of the few delicacies in the wasteland. While the meat is poisonous, the crab roe is amazing. It smelled great and tasted soft, and it was rumored to make men last longer too. But the soldiers would have to solve their problems themselves, since only Jiang Chen had the opportunity to take care of his needs. At night, around the giant pot, Jiang Chen, along with the soldiers of his private forces, ate the crab roe while chatting with Zhao Qiu. What do you think about Federation and Empire? Not much. Oh, they dare to call themselves Federation and Empire with such a small plot of land. It seems comical. Wang Zhou laughed. Haha, I don't disagree with you. Jiang Chen took a swig of the fruit champagne made on Coral Island. Why don't we use the hammer of order to give them a round? The 100-kilogram bomb could really make them reevaluate themselves, Wang Zhou jokingly suggested. The 100-kilogram bomb was just like a meteor. If a 10-kilogram bomb could take out a vehicle, a 100-kilogram bomb could collapse a building. Jiang Chen only smiled. Airship diplomacy was part of diplomacy. If necessary, he would consider this. Not far away, Ji Yuqing, who was wanted by the president, also enjoyed some crab roe and alcohol. But despite the delicacy and booze, there was no smile on his face. Buddy, don't waste the booze. How about you give me half? The soldier beside him finished his drink and patted Ji Yuqing's shoulder with a grin, but Ji Yuqing's eyes were focused on the bowl. That's enough. General already said the soldiers patrolling at night and in the morning are only permitted to drink half a bowl. Take it easy. His comrade punched him on the shoulder and reminded him, the rules of the 3rd Division were no joke. Don't be so stingy. I was just joking. The soldier savored the taste of alcohol in his mouth as he spoke with displeasure. Ji Yuqing suddenly stood up and pushed the 2 bowls in front of them. You guys can have it. Then he walked straight to Jiang Chen, leaving the 2 dumbfounded soldiers behind. Chapter 627. The Password to Immortality. Mr. Jiang Chen, I need your help. Stopped in front of Jiang Chen. Ji Yuqing's head was lowered and his voice was even lower. Help? Don't you think the fact that I didn't exchange your head for some crystals already did you a huge favor? Looking at the gloomy Ji Yuqing, Jiang Chen smiled. Just 2 hours ago, he experienced defeat, falling from Cloud 9 to hell. He previously thought his president would pay the ransom in exchange for him. He hadn't imagined it was a conspiracy targeting him from the start. He thought carefully and realized how it was possible for lousy thugs to dare to execute a kidnapping on Federation's territory. if one permitted it to happen. When he thought someone wanted to take his life, he didn't leave Nak's outpost although he felt afraid. If his president wanted his life, he wouldn't be safe wherever he went. The raiders in the area were more and less associated with that man, unless he escaped to Empire to become a slave. His only option would be to leave the region. He didn't just want to escape, he wanted to seek revenge on the people who stabbed him in the back. Nak was his last chance. Ji Yukeng took a deep breath and slowly said, "Just 3 days ago, I got drunk at the bar in the city, then I was taken outside of the city by someone. Do you think I want to listen to your story?" Ji Yukeng was clearly struggling to make a decision. Finally, he made up his mind, took a deep breath, and said, "Are you not curious why they want my life? Because of power?" Ji Yukeng shook his head. "Because of a secret." Jiang Chen looked intrigued. He looked at the wretched parliament member. "Oh, what secret?" "If you promise to kill Federation's president and advisor, kill all the bastards and I'll tell you the secret." "You're too confident. NAC isn't a killing organization." Jiang Chen ridiculed him. "But you're merchants, right? The vehicles of all the merchants from Wanghai have NAC's symbol." "That's not wrong." Jiang Chen put the alcohol aside and looked at him. "If you can convince me, I can even make you the president. But if you're just throwing me a hook to trick me into helping you, I'll regretfully tell you that there are no such good things in life." "A password," Ji Yukeng said. "What password?" "The password to immortality." With Jiang Chen's response and the same money sack, Zhu Beijin returned to Hamster Village. He didn't say anything to his villagers who had hopeful faces. Instead, he gathered the villagers of the nearby survival camps for a short meeting. While they were still unsettled, the survivors accepted Jiang Chen's terms and expressed their willingness to join NAC to become an economic zone under NAC's jurisdiction, controlled by the military government. It didn't take long for them to feel glad to make the decision. Just as Jiang Chen promised, NAC didn't need deprived people like them to pay much dues. Aside from a team of NAC soldiers patrolling each village daily to purchase supplies like concrete, crystal, and mutated fruit, their lives were almost unaffected. Or rather, with NAC's presence, the number of raiders and mutated humans decreased drastically. On the 7th day after Azorder arrived in Yukeng's rural area, a U-shaped airship landing tower was built on the empty plot of land between the military outpost and water treatment plant. At the same time, a second blimp arrived at the military outpost and brought along the first batch of supplies. The supplies included ammunition, living necessities, and food that made all the soldiers cheer. Even if the supplies were just compressed crackers, they'd be happy as long as it wasn't sour-tasting nutrient supply. In this depressing world, what else was more joyful than having a full stomach? The extra food was exchanged with local survivors. A box of compressed crackers could be exchanged for up to a bag of concrete, 10 crystals, or a full night of service from a survivor gal. NAC's rules didn't permit prostitution, but a willing trade between two parties was allowed as long as it took place outside of work hours. Since soldiers are humans too, being suppressed for too long could cause other problems. The survivors wouldn't eat the exchanged compressed crackers, they could sell them for at least 20 crystals in the city. Oftentimes, there was no supply at all. After the survivors gained approval from Jiang Chen, they established tents in front of the military outpost and formed a sizable market. Merchant fleets occasionally passing by would take a look to purchase useful goods. The blimp only stopped for 1 day at the outpost before carrying the 54 female slaves rescued from the prison back to Wanghai. With the arrival of the second blimp, the major forces in Yukeng all took on a cautious attitude. They previously thought NAC was only passing by, but with the establishment of an outpost and arrival of supplies, they looked like they planned to stay. Both Empire and Federation sent scouts to the military outpost. They scattered throughout the market and closely monitored the actions of the foreigners. Inside the city, Presidential Palace. NAC has only 500 people in their forces, but their equipment is extremely sophisticated with at least one kinetic skeleton per person. Inside the old office, Zhu Qingwei reported to the president. "What about power armors? Do they have power armors?" Sitting on the chair belonging to the president, Li Zhenping asked what he was most concerned about. Since they inherited the power armor belonging to the land forces, Federation wasn't at a disadvantage against Empire's human flood tactics. They were also Federation's strongest combat units. Zhu Qingwei thought before replying. They also have power armors. But they don't look like they are produced from before the war. They look handmade, therefore, their combat ability is inferior to ours. Not necessarily. They also have a steel airship with an unknown purpose. Li Zhenping scoffed. What age is this, who still uses junk like an airship, who would give them the opportunity to fly above their heads? Not to mention the anti-air machine guns. Even a cannon could take that thing out. Is Mr. G dead? We don't know. NAC hasn't contacted us yet. We also cannot infiltrate the military outpost, Zhu Weiang said. Kingshan Arena, the palace at the highest point of the stand. Emperor, we already detected that the NAC forces located at the water treatment plant have around 500 people. They are equipped with advanced technology. The retro-looking man had one knee on the ground while he reported to the man sitting in the gold chair. I want to know the combat abilities of that airship. The man in the golden chair had his legs crossed, giving off no Emperor vibes at all. Just like Ji Yukeng said, they were just a bunch of raiders 10 years ago who now just expanded. Although they used palace and dragon suit to disguise their past, these words didn't change their nature. Looking at their words and actions, the discord was evident. We don't currently know. The Empire put his leg down and stood up, smashing the chair. Pass my order, gather the elders to discuss a strategy. Roger. Chapter 628, Fallout Shelter 071. Fallout Shelter 071, located in Hukeng, stood in the barren land south of Yueyang town near the small hill by the Fu River. It had a depth of 1,000 meters. Precisely speaking, the geological formation of the area wasn't suitable for building deep fallout shelters, but the project was approved before 2150. At that time, the global situation was trending positively with rapid developments in aerospace technology. All the countries were working together and no one believed in war. The local government only built the shelter in order to meet the targets set by PAC. It wasn't until 2155 when the local government realized the Fallout Shelter project was no joke that they reinforced some of the poorly made ones used to meet the target. By 2160, Hukeng finally built enough fallout shelters with a capacity of 10 million people. On the way to the fallout shelter, the abandoned maglev train was still visible. The place was covered in grass and weeds with thorns tangled around the track. The wolves hiding in the dark scratched their sharp claws and exposed their fangs at the approaching NAC soldiers. Is this the hometown of Sun Zhao? Zhang Chen asked nonchalantly while staring at the stone sign corroded by acid rain. The letters and were no longer clear. The sheds around the train station still showed the marks of bullets and combustion. You could say that since we were born in this fallout shelter. Sun Ziru's face was pensive as she gently caressed the stone sign, just like touching a tomb of the deceased. The tomb belonged to a civilization. General, be careful. Li Wang noticed the wolves hidden among the bushes. He raised his rifle along with two other private force soldiers and stood in front of Zhang Chen and Sun Ziru. The pack of wolves realized they were noticed. They jumped out howling with their bloody mouths wide open. The soldiers pressed the trigger calmly and turned the wolves into nothing. Good job. Zhang Chen patted Li Wang on the shoulder. But make sure you remember to call me captain here. Yes. Li Wang nodded. Guard the door. We'll be out before night. Zhang Chen noticed it wasn't noon yet and instructed the soldiers behind him. Li Wang looked troubled at being left outside. I have to disobey the order. I'm responsible for your safety. What danger could there be in an abandoned fallout shelter? There will probably only be a few mutated cockroaches at most. But, no buts. This is an order. Seeing Zhang Chen's decisive attitude, Li Wang had to comply. He organized the soldiers to position the vehicles in front of the door and created a temporary blockade. He agreed with Zhang Chen that if Zhang Chen wasn't out by 6 in the evening, He'd bring people down for support. The reason why he didn't take people down wasn't because of his confidence in his own abilities but because of considerations. The secret to immortality was destined to only be controlled by a few. Fortunately, the elevator was still functional. It took half a minute before the elevator stopped at the bottom. Jiang Chen then saw the gate to Fallout Shelter 071. Every Fallout shelter had a different design, but the structures were mostly the same. The gear-shaped gate was wide open. From the thick dust on the ground, the place had been deserted for a long time. A body against the door was wearing a blue uniform. From the blood stain on the chest, the person must have died of a gun wound. The raiders' attack was unexpected. The director ordered security to attack back, but a man-made fire made everything turn into chaos. Sister ran outside and encountered a PLA female warrior when she wandered around the shambles. Sister must have told you all this. That's right. Jiang Chen nodded. Retro ideologists in the Hua area, they were organized under the previous flags and strictly forced themselves to abide by glory and virtue. They attempted to recreate the magnificent country in these shambles, but up until now, Jiang Chen still hadn't seen them. What about you? Sun Ziru shook her head. It happened too long ago. My memory of that incident is cloudy. I just vaguely remember. It was the Dusk Church who took me in. If it's a sorrowful past, don't think about it, Jiang Chen said quietly. Brother-in-law is so gentle. Ziru smiled. I'm so envious that sister met you first. Let's get moving. Jiang Chen dry coughed to mask the awkwardness. He raised his gun and walked into the Fallout shelter first. With her finger tapping her lips out of habit, Sun Ziru's mouth was curved up with joy. She then slid down the graphene glasses on the helmet and followed. The Fallout shelter was completely dark inside without even basic lighting. The nuclear fusion fuel rod was used up a long time ago and the two could only use the headlights on their helmets. The layout is similar to Fallout Shelter 027. Jiang Chen picked up a diary and brushed the dust off. Last entry. Looks like we bombed back to the Stone Age. Unfortunately, we are in the same boat. Greater than. He put the diary on the table nearby. With his rifle loaded, he continued to press forward. Screech. A sharp screech broke out through the darkness. Jiang Chen immediately turned his rifle to lock onto the source of the sound only to discover a few fat rats squeezed into the corner. They're mutated rats. Unless they're very hungry, they typically won't attack humans, Sun Ziru said. We should still be careful. Jiang Chen let out a sigh and opened the life signal detector on the helmet. The big grab even ate people. While it was in the distant past, since she lived there for a long time, Sun Ziru still had memories of the layout of the Fallout shelter. Due to a lack of electricity, the elevator inside the Fallout shelter wasn't functional. The two of them chose to use safety stairs instead. The dark corners hid unknown dangers, but they were lucky to encounter merely a cow-sized mutated spider and nothing more dangerous. Their kinetic skeletons were too strong for the fangs of the spider. Its giant mouth suddenly attacked him from the darkness, making Jiang Chen jump before the unlucky spider's head was chopped off by Sun Ziru's dagger. After taking care of the fluid on his arm, he discovered only shallow teeth marks on the armor covering his left arm. To prevent accidents from occurring, when he passed by the spider web, Jiang Chen crushed all the spider eggs. Finally, the two of them arrived at the office of the director in the deepest part of the Fallout shelter. Everything related to the Fallout shelter was recorded there. As the brain of the Fallout shelter, the electricity system was independent from the exterior. It was supplied by a separate battery. I don't understand one thing. How did Federation know the password? It was obtained by a small parliament member and their president felt the need to shut him up, Jiang Chen said while typing the password into the terminal. Yet Federation's president, who knew the password, didn't come here after all this time. Sun Ziru pondered. Could it be that they don't know the location of the Fallout shelter? It doesn't look like it. Sun Ziru shook her head. The moment the door of the office was opened, a light on the wall lit up and sent the darkness away. At the same time, a gentle female voice entered their ears. Thank you for using Fallout Shelter technology. Fallout Shelter technology will do its best to serve you. What's going on? Zhang Chen pulled out his rifle and cautiously pointed at his surroundings. The power system reactivated? That's impossible. The fallout shelter should be out of power already. Staring at the screen on the wall, Sun Ziru muttered, Chapter 629, The Director's Diary. The two waited for a long time at the door with their rifles pointed at the entrance not far away, but after a long wait, there was nothing. Someone entered the power room to replace the fuel rod? That's impossible. Li Wang is guarding the entrance of the fallout shelter. No one should have been able to come in. Zhang Chen put the rifle behind his back. He took out a drone terminal from the storage dimension and placed it behind a wall. 10 hummingbird drones flew out from the hive and hovered around the walkways. Why did you take out the drones? Sun Ziru was curious. It feels eerie being so empty inside. Let the drones guard us. We can search for useful information in the meantime. Zhang Chen set the patrol order on the terminal, scanned the dark entrance, and walked toward the door. When he passed through the metal door, he saw a skeleton in a director's uniform. There was a pistol along with a diary beside him. It looked like a suicide. Someone came here before us not long ago. Sun Ziru used her gun to poke the chest of the skeleton before she spoke with her eyebrows furrowed. Why do you say so? Zhang Chen picked up the diary on the ground. These clothes. Don't you find something odd about them? What's odd? The office of the director is the command center of the fallout shelter. The door we just passed by has a UV bacteria cleansing device installed, making this room free of bacteria. Inside a sealed environment without bacteria, the decomposition of bodies is extremely slow. While 10 years is a long time, it's not long enough for his body to have become this. Sun Ziru said. It made sense. While 10 years was a long time, the body shouldn't have decomposed to this extent, and based on Sun Zhao's memories, the director should have been in the camp above ground, leading security forces in fighting the raiders. There was no reason for him to be there. For some reason, someone dragged the body of the director from the surface back down to the shelter. Or maybe they used some other body and just changed the body into the director's uniform. Zhang Chen examined his surroundings, attempting to look for some clues from the environment. Unfortunately, he didn't possess any detective skills. Someone came here, moved the body of the director here, and took something out. Zhang Chen muttered while looking at the diary in his hands, and also left this diary. That's the only explanation. With her finger on her lips, Sun Ziru's eyebrows knitted together. Perhaps Federation's president came here already and changed the fuel rod in the power room when he came. That's why the fallout shelter suddenly lit up when we activated the door to the director's office. Since he already got what he wanted here, then he naturally wouldn't mind Ji Yukeng leaking the password and just wanted to kill him to protect the secret to eternal life. But that doesn't make sense. If he really wanted to keep that a secret, there was no reason for him to leave a diary as a clue. Zhang Chen fell into deep thought staring at the diary in his hands. He pulled out a chair to sit down and flipped the diary open. He was surprised to discover the bottom of each page was blocked out by dark squares in black pen. The dates were artificially hidden for some unknown reason. The first week the fallout shelter closed, we could still receive messages from the outside. Out of consideration for people's emotions, we decided to only report the good news and censor battle reports disadvantageous to the pack. We also encouraged people by saying that the nuclear war would end soon, that NATO was no match for us. This is the first year we spent New Year's in the fallout shelter. From today onward, we couldn't receive any messages from the outside. The battlefront has already been retracted to the Yukeng area. Out of safety considerations, the fallout shelter entered radio silence and completely cut off contact with the external world. This feeling is inexplicable. It feels as if civilized society entered a forest and the outside is completely dark to us. In order for us to survive, we have to strangle our own throats, stuff our ears to not make any sounds, and distrust any information that could be fake. Until we reach the year the lock expires, the door of the fallout shelter won't open. 1 year and 3 weeks. Work every day is around the same, and the food is also similar. In order to ensure the diary entries aren't too boring, I changed to writing once per week, but it looks like the boring days are about to be over. Today, someone came to see me and said he was an observer and academic from the Han Science Institute. He declared that in order to fulfill the orders given by PAC, he wanted to cooperate to conduct experiments in the fallout shelter. He did show me a signed document from my superior. Since I was bored, I agreed to his request. The one condition I set was not to endanger the lives of the fallout shelter residents. As the director of the fallout shelter, that's my duty. Greater than 1 year and 4 weeks. The experiment has started. While it's an experiment, it only requires conducting regular blood checks of every resident. It doesn't interfere with the lives of the residents at all. I noticed he had a list of names. Some names had circles drawn. I asked him the meaning of the circles, but he didn't tell me. Greater than 1 year and 5 weeks. 1 week into the experiment, he came to see me and told me it was time to conduct the next round of experiments. I asked him what he needed and he told me to arrest the people on the list with symbols. It was ridiculous. While I'm the director, that doesn't mean I have the authority to do whatever I want. He threatened me and said this is the highest order from my superior. Once the fallout shelter is locked down for the long term, the plan must be executed. If I reject the order, it would be viewed as treason. Greater than. Okay, I gave in. You can bear witness to all the consequences. This damn mission. Damn it. I unwillingly told everyone that the survivors on the list were diagnosed with a dangerous genetic disease. They'll be forced to enter the hibernation chamber to wait for future treatment. There is a little girl on the list. It's too cruel to take away the child from her parents, so I took her name off the list. Did I do a good deed? Fortunately, the mission was successfully completed without causing massive panic in the fallout shelter. The 30 experiment officially began, and all the frozen popsicles in the hibernation chambers are his experiment subjects. Greater than. 1 year and 9 weeks. I finally discovered today that the observer named by my superior has authority equal to mine in the fallout shelter. I can call security robots, but he can order the security robots to drop their weapons. As for how I found out, fine, we were in conflict. He asked me for the little girl I took out from the list, and I demanded him to release data from the experiment. He rejected in the name of confidentiality, so I took a step back and demanded their health statuses, but he also rejected that. Greater than. This is too evil. What did I discover? What did I do? How could he lie to me to perform such heinous acts? I can't wait any longer. We have to do something. Even if the robots listen to him, my soldiers are still loyal to me. Greater than. Today, I organized the security forces. We attacked the lab and found the bodies of the people on the list. Greater than. All the people who entered the lab reached a tacit agreement to keep what they saw a secret. I discovered in a confined environment that people are far more fragile than they think. We can't drag this on any longer. We have to leave this place. Once this place reaches the lowest possible standard of confinement, we'll leave. The darkness is suffocating. Greater than. There were many pages torn from the diary, and it only recorded the first 2 years after the fallout shelter closed. But just from the brief sentences, Zhang Chen still managed to decipher the information hidden in this diary. Another observer, academician Qin, was one too. He used Fallout Shelter 027 to simulate changes in a civilization in an isolated environment. He began suspecting that all the Fallout shelters performed near-crazy experiments. Zero? Zhang Chen put down the diary and deeply inhaled. Do you still remember life in the Fallout shelter? Most of my memories are cloudy, but I remember everything about Sister clearly. Sister was really cute back then. It's not about Sun Zhao. Do you remember that a lot of people went missing 1 year? Sun Ziru shook her head and face-palmed at Zhang Chen's question. Brother-in-law. Notice the time. The diary recorded that the experiments were completed 1 year and 9 weeks after the closure. I wasn't born yet. Zhang Chen took a moment to process that before he realized. He closed the diary and stood up. It's getting late. Since there are no clues here, It's time to go. Sun Ziru still wasn't convinced. She searched the office carefully but still couldn't find any useful clues. She gritted her teeth and had a defeated expression. Looks like we came here for nothing. Not necessarily. Zhang Chen patted the diary. We still managed to find some useful information. The diary might not be true. Both the location of the diary and the obvious changes make it look too coincidental, Sun Ziru reminded him. I know. Zhang Chen nodded. But this is the only clue. We just need to find that observer. If he's alive. The whereabouts of the observer weren't recorded in the diary. Perhaps it was recorded originally but tripped out. If he wasn't dead, the secret of immortality should be in his hands. But when he thought about that, Zhang Chen began to have a headache. It was more difficult to find someone in the wasteland than fighting the Mother of Death Claws. Chapter 630, Empire's Capital. Before they left, Zhang Chen and Sun Ziru went to the power room and hibernation center separately. Just as Sun Ziru suspected, someone came to the fallout shelter to install a new fuel rod for the place. The person even lived there for an extended period of time, but for some reason, or perhaps because he reached his goal, he left. And it had been years. After he left, he shut down power to the fallout shelter until Zhang Chen entered the password at the terminal to finally wake up the dormant fallout shelter 071. Immortality, or at least extending life, is part of the intergalactic colonization plan, although it isn't necessary. The Dusk Church attempted to take me here, and they did get here. But because they didn't know the password to the office, they could do nothing about the things inside. Could the door not be blown open? Zhang Chen asked. Based on what Han Junhui said, the door of the office at Fallout Shelter 027 was opened through force. Not unless it was permitted by design. Otherwise, even if you blew up the entire Fallout Shelter, you might not even blow open this room. Sun Ziru sighed. Zhang Chen processed that information and shook his head. This is too dark. He was referring to both this place 1,000 meters below the surface and the fallout shelter itself. Sun Ziru grinned and continued the topic. The church finally did collect some interesting clues outside the fallout shelter. For example, the experiments of the observer and the director refusing to continue with the experiment involved a girl. The girl took off the list mentioned in the diary. It's possible. Sun Ziru nodded seriously. Since she was chosen as an experimental subject, there should be something unique about her. Observer, girl. Only these two clues? Zhang Chen searched through the entire fallout shelter without finding the lab mentioned in the diary. Sun Ziru carefully sifted through her memories from when she was young and had no recollection of the lab at all. The horrific experiments conducted by the observer were brought to the grave along with the abandonment of Fallout Shelter 071. But aside from the secret to immortality, the two also found some interesting stuff. One experimental quantum computer, a taken-apart soilless plantation device, and some stuff only available in the fallout shelter. It was a pleasant surprise to find a quantum computer there, as most of the abandoned fallout shelters had been razed through by scavengers. The electronic parts and special material of the quantum computer could be used for weapons. Since the quantum computer hadn't been uncovered by scavengers, that meant it was hidden well. The two took a stroll in the fallout shelter. After confirming there was no other useful stuff, they left marks on the items that needed to be moved. Along with the diary, Zhang Chen and Ziru stood in the elevator as they returned to the surface. When he pressed the start button, he raised his left arm and glanced at the time on the EP. It was precisely 6. When they arrived at the surface, the soldiers all went to greet him. General, if you didn't come out just now, we would have gone down. Li Wang was relieved when he saw Zhang Chen. It's already this late? Zhang Chen looked up. The day had turned completely dark. It looked like it was about to rain. What are you planning to do with the fallout shelter? Sun Ziru asked. Temporarily take control of the place, and at least maintain an inspection station here. As well as a cemetery, Zhang Chen said while scanning the bodies all around. With a gracious smile, Sun Ziru gently nodded. He ordered Li Wang along with 5 soldiers to guard the place as Zhang Chen entered the vehicle and returned to the military outpost. Before dark, a helicopter would arrive, bringing supplies and backup. Qingshan Arena, the capital of Empire. In the beginning, Empire wasn't called Empire but had a plain name, Qingshan Survivors Gathering. The people there were nowhere close to nice. They occasionally did some mercenary work while being raiders in the dark, but the villages west of Gan River formed an alliance and referred to themselves as Federation. They elected a president through voting and established a wireless base station to launch propaganda at nearby residents. The survivors at Qingshan saw this, used the opportunity to clear their name and adopted a different name, with the principle that they would never be inferior to their archenemy, Federation. They referred to themselves as Empire, using the ideology of rebuilding civilization, and promoting openness and freedom to attract merchants and population growth in the region. Federation gradually became a wealthy gathering spot, but with the increase in traffic, loose laws, corruption, and crime prospered there and spread to every corner of Federation like a plague. Everything there could be bought with a clear price tag, whether it was the position of president or the head of a parliament member. The contrary was true for Empire. With their origins as raiders, they had the thug tradition all along, so they took the route of centralized power. They gathered a group of raiders and gave stocks to powerful mercenaries, then they accepted the mutated humans tribe as their own. People with histories of crime could become accomplices to share power while the honest could only work hard. The clear social structure was simple, yet it established a primal power pyramid. As for who would be the emperor, patrilineal succession would definitely not work. Otherwise, the bosses of the raiders and mercenaries wouldn't be pleased. Then who should be the emperor? The first leader was an intelligent leader. He dug out the crown abdication system. 1. Embedded deep in history, everyone could be the emperor, and everyone took turns being the emperor. Federation and Empire. It was hard to say who was more heinous and who was more civilized. Since this was the wasteland, it was a dumpster. This is the history of Empire and Federation. A mercenary with a PK-2000 rifle on his back took Zhao Badong to pass through the gates while explaining the history. Zhao Badong, an ex-Qingpu survivor, he joined Fishbone Base with the Hunter Division and cleared out the bacterial source with Zhang Chen long ago. But he wasn't as well off as his friend Ma Zhongchen. That guy already became the head of the Hunter Division, and he was only the captain of a reconnaissance platoon. He couldn't be blamed since he made the wrong decision from the beginning. The first survivor community Zhang Chen visited was his, and what did he do? Not only did he reject the proposal to fight with him, but he took out a recoilless cannon and asked Zhang Chen to leave. Zhang Chen didn't seek responsibility from him in the end. While a gun was pointed at Zhao Badong, he cooperated. Without the Qingpu survivors, the X2 bacteria source couldn't have been eliminated by the power armors alone. If he could achieve success in his missions, he thought he could get promoted. Therefore he requested to go to Hukong and boarded the supply blimp with the reconnaissance platoon. After he entered the gate, he stood in front of the arena. The mercenary eyed him. The guard with a homemade rifle also looked at him. Zhao Badong immediately took out 4 grain-sized crystals from his pocket with a smile and stuffed them into the guard's hand. He then pointed at the mercenary beside him. Together, without saying anything, the guard tossed the crystal on the detector, and the number stopped at 4. Zhao Badong looked reminiscent, watching the number jumping up and down on the crystal detector. The 6th Street hadn't used this equipment for a very long time. The entire Suhang province had no trace of this device at all. People all used Nax credit points to purchase goods, so crystals became a product instead. That was why a lot of soldiers were unwilling to be sent here. Compared to the advanced Wanghai, this was an undeveloped mountainous range. Still, without speaking, the guard waved his gun and looked at the survivors behind the two of them. The mercenary beside Zhao Badong immediately dragged on his sleeves to signal he could pass. Do we not need to hand in our weapons when we enter the city? No need. You only need to do that when you enter the palace, the mercenary said. Palace? Zhao Badong paused for a second. It's right there. At the end of the hall, the mercenary pointed at the highest point of the arena. Stepping into the open arena, an explosion of scenery instantly entered his vision. The wide field had no grass on it. Instead, it was replaced by markets, houses, and even fruit gardens. The place was surrounded by natural walls guarding the place like city walls. On the tall stand was Empire's flag. This was the capital. Worth mentioning was that the arena of the 22nd century was much bigger compared to the 21st century. It was comparable to a 9-hole golf course, including the area underground. The arena could hold a total of 50,000 people. This was the center of Empire. Thank you, buddy. If there's anything you don't need, you can find me at the bar. Before I accept new mercenary missions, I'll be there. The mercenary waved at him and disappeared down the street. Based on their agreement, Zhao Badong would pay a 2 crystal gate tax and the mercenary would bring Zhao Badong here while giving him a vivid history lesson. It was extremely worth it for Zhao Badong to purchase such valuable information with just 2 crystals. While the mission budget was generous, it was better to use crystals at critical points. He took a piece of paper from his pocket and confirmed the task Jiang Chen gave him for the last time before he headed to the hostel. He needed to find a place to stay to organize the information he already gathered, then he would transmit the information wirelessly to the military outpost. Chapter 631, The Sudden Alarm. When Jiang Chen and the group returned to the military outpost, the cooks were beginning to clean up the cooking pots. The logistics personnel saw that the general had come back and immediately greeted him, asking if they should fire up the pots again. But Jiang Chen rejected his good intention and took Sun Ziru to the direction of the general room. The day before yesterday was pizza, yesterday was spaghetti. What are we going to eat today? On the way back, Sun Ziru had a smile on her face while she said happily with a finger on her lips. It was a lavish problem for the people of the wasteland. What about seafood fried rice? Although fried rice doesn't taste too great after reheating, Jiang Chen wanted rice. No, I still want to eat pizza. Sun Ziru hugged Jiang Chen's arm and used her innocent eyes to stare at Jiang Chen, a common tactic she used. Okay. I said not to be coy here. It won't be good if other people saw this. Jiang Chen wanted to drag his arm out, but she naughtily hugged onto it tighter. So, what's the matter? Sun Ziru teasingly blinked. There were rarely people that passed by the general room with most of the patrols done by drones, so there was no need to worry about other people. Just as Sun Ziru thought about that, she immediately made eye contact with Han Junhua, who was standing at the door. Sun Ziru let him go, rolled out her tongue, and jumped aside. Han Junhua slightly turned her head and spoke expressionlessly to Jiang Chen. Do I need to leave for now? No need. Jiang Chen awkwardly coughed. Is something wrong? Since it was in a military outpost, while there was no one around, it was still considered out in public. Therefore, it wouldn't look good to be so intimate. As the general, he especially needed to be the role model. Han Junhua nodded and handed him a thermos container. You just returned from the fallout shelter and you must still be hungry. I asked the cook to make extra, but Jiang Chen didn't take the container and only stared at her blankly. Sun Ziru, who stood beside him, was only completely shocked. Is there something wrong? Han Junhua was confused at the two's dumbfounded expressions. No, it is just that. Regathering his thoughts, Jiang Chen smiled and took the container. This is very unlike you, is it? While her face was still expressionless, he could read the confused emotion in her eyes. At the same time, Jiang Chen could clearly sense the piercing gaze of the person standing beside him. When Han Junhua left, the two returned to the room. Opening the container, Jiang Chen looked at the rice and dishes divided clearly and squarely while a curvature appeared on his mouth. The odd way of putting food was indeed Han Junhua's character. With a few strands of hair dangling on his shoulder, Sun Ziru put her face beside Jiang Chen's. The vibrant red lips were mixed with some jealousy. Brother-in-law is so popular. Am I? You are. Sun Ziru bit on Jiang Chen's ear, displeased. Then she murmured to herself, but if it is Sister Junhua, I don't think Sister will mind. Jiang Chen's eyebrows jumped and he threw the container into the storage dimension while feeling exasperated. This girl is becoming naughtier. If he doesn't punish her, where is the authority of the head of the family? Brother-in-law is angry? Jiang Chen suddenly stood up. Amongst Ziru's scream, he put her on his shoulder. Brother-in-law, What do you want to do? Wait, Ziru is hungry. Could you wait for a bit? No. QQ. Gulp, gulp. Humphrey. Now you're afraid? Too late. Looking at the pouting Ziru, the evil Zhang Chen laughed. The next morning, the second blimp arrived at Hukan. Other than bringing a large number of supplies, the blimp also brought NAC's most powerful drone units, Reptile and Python. But based on what the captain said, their trip was not too peaceful. When they flew over the Yellow Mountain, the blimp was attacked by anti-air machine guns. Fortunately, they were above the clouds. While some bullets struck the bottom of the blimp, the bullets at the end of its range didn't manage to do damage. The information of NAC using blimp to transport supplies was known by the survivors along the way. While we flew above the clouds, the radar could still easily capture such a large target, and our speed was not fast. Once we were locked in, we were just a moving target. Fortunately, they used machine guns and not anti-air cannons. Recalling what happened last night, the captain still felt frightened. After thinking for a moment, Zhang Chen thought of a solution. I'll send Aurora 20 to protect you. With Aurora 20's air-to-land attack ability, it shouldn't be a problem to take out a few anti-air machine guns. Someone dares to plot against NAC's supplies? Do they think they lived long enough? That would be the best. They might use anti-air cannon next time. The captain smiled bitterly. But sending out the fighter jet was not a long-term solution. Aurora 20's transport fuel had a long production amount, but the cost was daunting. A flying mission's cost was around 1,000 credits per hour, and thus the cost of a supply mission would drag that number up by several folds. It was probably more economical to purchase locally. Before ending the conversation, Zhang Chen ordered him to stay for 3 days at the base and bring the quantum computer found in Fallout Shelter 071 back. All scientists at Fallout Shelter 027 used 3 experiment quantum computers in total, highlighting how much NAC lacked quantum computers, and because of this, Zhang Chen was determined to control the Quantum Computer Research Institute. Whether it was for the virtual reality network in the modern world or for the development of the NAC, he must control the production technology of the quantum computer. Is there any news of the Quantum Computer Research Institute? Zhang Chen asked Wang Zhou in the office. We posted at the market outside of the outpost that information was wanted for the research institute, but we currently haven't received any useful information, Wang Zhou said regretfully. Zhang Chen frowned. The advisor of the Federation only told them the rough location, but the area from east of Gang River to the west of Panyang Lake was all sovereignty of the Empire. With such a massive area, where was he going to find the small institute? Suddenly, the alarm outside began to ring. Zhang Chen and Wang Zhou looked at each other. They immediately stood up and headed out. Chapter 632, The Mutated Human Tribe. What happened? Walking to the gate of the outpost, Zhang Chen scanned the crowd in the distance with his eyes narrowed. It's the mutated humans. The soldier on duty saluted. Mutated humans? Zhang Chen raised his eyebrows. If it is the mutated humans, why waste energy on speaking with them? Ji Yukeng walked to Zhang Chen. Guru tribe. They are the mutated human tribe of Empire. He pointed at the slanted flag. That dragon flag is the flag of Empire. The group was approaching and Zhang Chen saw the appearance of the group. They were muscular giants with green skin. The muscles on their body were bulging out. They were covered in drapes and held clothes with rifles that looked toothpick thin compared to their giant arms. The clothes looked improvised. Only 2 or 3 mutated humans wielded armors made out of C-type steel with massive power armor in hand. In Wanghai, the mutated humans and humans had an eternal grudge, but this didn't seem to be the case here. When the survivors saw the mutated humans, while they looked afraid, they didn't display the fear on their faces. Should we fire? Wang Zhou looked at Zhang Chen. As long as he orders, the fireball one on the airship will turn the mutated monsters into flames. No rush. Let's hear what they have to say first. But if they continue to move forward, Zhang Chen's eyes narrowed with a hint of coldness surfacing on his face. Then let our airship warn them. The group of mutated humans, fortunately, didn't step onto the red line set by the NAC. They stopped before the airship fired. Guro tribe spread out 800 meters in front of the NAC outpost. If they fought, it was the typical combat distance. The crowd momentarily turned rowdy before a green-skinned muscular giant walked out. He had a flag in his right hand while he dragged a vicious dog in his left hand. The survivors at the entrance of the market whispered to each other. They began to collect their stuff to avoid him. Zhang Chen eyed his soldier. Li Wang understood and walked in front of the mutated human. He raised his gun before the mutated human arrived. "Please stop. It is NAC's territory up front. We are the delegates sent from Guru tribe." The mutated human roared in a loud voice. He looked at Zhang Chen. "We brought greetings from the elder." "Oh, the greetings of the elder? Tell me about it." Zhang Chen looked at him. "Since you're doing business in Guru tribe's territory, then you must give tribute to the magnificent Guru elder." The mutated human stabbed the flag on the ground. Disgusting saliva was dripping out from his vicious fangs. "Or else, your action will be viewed as disrespectful to God." Zhang Chen and Zhao Qinwu exchanged eye contact and they simultaneously began to laugh. "Rude humans." The mutated human's eyes widened and he threatened. "You don't know that in Empire's territory, you're all third-tier people. Even if I rip you apart, the Emperor won't criticize me at all." It was the first time in Empire's territory where he saw someone this disrespectful to mutated humans. Whether it was a lone traveler passing the area, or a survivor that lived there, anyone that dared to anger the mutated humans must pay serious consequences for their foolishness. If they dared to fight back, it was viewed as an obstruction to the friendship between Empire and the mutated humans. The soldiers of the Empire would hunt them till the border of Empire. "Then did you tell your Emperor that the people here haven't paid tax for a long time?" Wang Zhou mocked. "Would NAC be afraid of a bastard emperor?" The tax official of Empire arrived at Hamster Village days before and happened to meet the patrol team of the NAC. The consequence was obvious. Because of the poor judgment of the unlucky tax official, he was beaten and thrown into the detention room. From that day on, Empire didn't send another tax official there again. They didn't even dare to ask about NAC's invasion on their territory. In front of cannons, a human's mind is a lot calmer compared to a mutated human's mind. "Our elder doesn't care." The mutated human arrogantly raised his chest. "The Emperor declared this area belonged to our tribe. So you must pay tribute. If you reject, it will be viewed as disrespectful to Guru tribe." Zhang Chen burst out laughing again when he saw the cocky expression. "In Wanghai, I heard that the head of mutated humans is not that great." "It certainly is true from what I see today." The mutated human ambassador was instantly enraged. The mutated humans hated people humiliating their intelligence because the FEV virus does have the side effect of decreasing brain cell activity. The hand dragged onto the iron shackle raised. He pointed it at Zhang Chen and shouted in anger. "How dare you! Your humiliation will be viewed as provocative to Guru tribe. I will let you know what is rage and cruelty." The severed arm spun in the air. The mutated human collapsed to the ground in pain, covering the place where his arm was as blood gushed out. On the wall of the outpost, Sun Ziru gently smiled and moved the sniper rifle in her hands. "You'll suffer if you're disrespectful to the NAC general." The mutated dog escaped the shackle and immediately leaped at Zhang Chen's group, but the creature didn't manage to run 2 steps before it was gunned down by Li Wang. The sudden change happened in an instant. No one expected the situation would suddenly turn into a crossfire, facing the delegation from mutated humans. They clearly didn't expect NAC's reaction being this violent. They even shot their ambassador. That shot ignited their vengeance. As order, aim at all mutated human units 800 meters from the outpost. Fire. Zhang Chen opened the radio and ordered with a merciless voice. Roar. Mutated humans screamed and unleashed their firepower at NAC's outpost. The bullets with orange trials shredded the tents in the market, destroyed the frame, and hit the concrete wall of the outpost. The survivors that realized the situation was heading south already ran away, so the bullets didn't hit them, but the rain of bullets didn't last for 2 seconds before being suppressed by the bullet hailstorm. 4 12.76mm machine guns unleashed fire and the waterfall of bullets exploded the dust on the ground and turned the fleeing mutated humans into meat chunks. NAC soldiers hid behind the bunkers and fired back with their rifles. At the same time, Python drones were all activated and circled behind the mutated humans from the wing. Behind the transparent graphene bunker, Zhang Chen looked at the hologram screen of thugs being slaughtered by the bullets from the sky with coldness. The policy of Empire spoiled them. They really think they are superior? NAC only had one policy when it came to the bloodthirsty thugs: kill. After killing the mutants, throw their body into the incinerator chamber. That is where they belong. Chapter 633, Using Others' Knife to Kill. Capital, the Palace. Did Guru tribe start fighting against the NAC? My Emperor, based on the scout at the front line, the two sides are engaging in battle. Perfect? The Emperor nodded. A pleased smile appeared on the well-defined face. After the last Emperor's placate strategy, Guru tribe began to expand. The previous force used as deterrence against Federation now became a tumor of Empire. The mutated humans' population was not high from the start. It was not a big deal to give them some special rights, but based on this trend, the humans will be a minority. Empire would no longer be Empire, not including the mutated humans. The total population of Empire was around 150,000, but the growing population of mutated humans was 80,000. Could they still be considered a minority? Of course not. Including the elders, discussion of including the cannibals inside Empire, and retaining their tradition was all out of consideration of balancing the power of the mutated humans. But balance didn't seem to do the trick anymore. With NAC's arrival at Hukong and their blitz action to remove the raiders at the water treatment plant, they displayed their power and firm stance to the local forces. The Emperor first remained cautious to the external force, since the area of the water treatment plant was part of Empire's territory. However, then he gave it a thought and concluded the appearance of order may not necessarily be bad, and it happened to solve a critical problem. Empire didn't have strong control of the east rural area to begin with. If he declared the unnecessary area to the mutated human tribe, it not only would satisfy their growing appetite, but potentially would also cause the two to suffer great defeat. Since Hukong was still hundreds of kilometers from Wanghai, unless the NAC made up their mind to include this area into their territory, the casualties against Guru tribe will force them to back away. Different from the lousy thugs in the water treatment plant, while the mutated humans were not the brightest, their combat ability was not weak at all. Or rather, the FEV virus already engraved the word battle into the genetics of these monsters. Just out of instinct, they could explode with combat ability no inferior to trained soldiers. But the combat ability was not effective under the suppression of aerial firepower. A few RPGs were launched out by the mutated humans to the air, but they quickly exploded under the laser anti-missile defense system. As to the machine guns firing into the air, they couldn't even leave a dent on the C-type steel armor of Azorder. The machine guns in the air were suffocating. The mutated humans began to retreat. Zhang Chen wouldn't let their wish come true. You must be joking. Since you provoked me, leave your life here and you can leave. The Python drones moved to the wing and unleashed its supreme firepower to the fleeing mutated humans. At the same time, the NAC infantries accompanied by armored vehicles pursued the retreating mutated humans. Damn it, these ugly humans' firepower is strong. With disgusting blood dripped out from his forehead, Lu leaned behind a half-collapsed apartment building while jamming a clip into the machine gun. He then peeked out while roaring, "For the glory of Guru!" Ta-ta-ta. Bullets jumped between the bunkers. He clearly saw an ex-soldier fall because of his bullets, but unfortunately, he didn't see clearly whether the person ducked down or was killed before his head was cracked open by the soaring bullets. Curling behind the half-destroyed concrete pillar, Li Wang took a deep breath and stood up with the help of the Reaper assault rifle. He was hit 2 times in the chest. Luckily, the K2 kinetic skeleton's excellent external defense saved him. While his ribcage was in pain, he could continue to fight. Two pythons soared by him. Li Wang loaded his gun and continued to chase the mutated humans. The gunner firing at him already died in another's hand. When he stepped over the headless body, he glanced at the mixture of red and white on the ground, feeling shocked. From the head explosion, the unlucky guy must have died of a sniper rifle. The front-line force was not equipped with sniper rifles, but since the bullet came from the outpost, the sniper was too frightening. This place was 1,000 meters away from the outpost. Right now, at the watchtower, Sun Ziru put down the sniper rifle in her hands and leaned it against the wall. The mutated humans already ran away. She could not see them from her location anymore. She elegantly took out the tactical gloves and directly jumped down from the 8 meters tall watchtower. What you did is too rushed. While you have advanced equipment, the mutated humans occupy a large amount of fertile land to the west of Panyang Lake. They have a population of at least 80,000, Ji Yukeng said, troubled. The 80,000 mutated humans were all soldiers, and they didn't include the human slaves. While the mutated human tribe's weapons were crude, it didn't mean they didn't have heavy firepower. And the NAC military outpost, at most, stationed 1,000-something people. Even with the support from the airship, it would not be easy to fight against 80 times the force. You probably don't know. In Jia City, there were probably at least 80,000, or even 100,000 mutated humans that died to my 1st Division. Zhang Chen used his EP to send out orders and said nonchalantly to Ji Yukeng, perhaps you're really strong, but this is Hukeng. They are fighting at their front door, and your supply line is 600 kilometers long. Ji Yukeng reminded him. He hoped Zhang Chen could help to become the president, so he didn't want to see NAC fight against the mutated humans without anything to gain. Only the president of Federation would feel for this situation. How many 100-kilogram bombs were transported here? Zhang Chen looked to Wang Zhou. 200 rounds. Not bad. What about Fireball 1? 2,000 missiles. Excellent. Enough for the consumption of a war. Contact Wang Qin and get the logistic department to transport 2,000 more missiles. Remember, combustion and explosive each 2,000 rounds. Roger. Wang Zhou saluted and immediately headed to the command room. After instructing the necessary commands, Zhang Chen looked at Ji Yukeng again. Let's talk somewhere else. Without waiting for his reply, Zhang Chen headed to the middle of the outpost. Chapter 634, Being Used. Ji Yukeng followed Zhang Chen. Seeing there was no one around, he gulped and cautiously said, did you find the secret to immortality? Not yet. Is the password not right? The password is right, but unfortunately, someone already went into the director office. Zhang Chen took out the diary from his pocket. I only found this. Ji Yukeng wanted to grab it, but Zhang Chen didn't plan to give him the diary. His hand awkwardly hung in the air for a while before he took it back. Then our agreement. Of course it counts. Zhang Chen smiled. It is beneficial for me to make an obedient person the president. Based on their agreement, Ji Yukeng will tell us the password and he will help Ji Yukeng become the president, and kill the former president and advisor stabbing him in the back. And the first thing Ji Yukeng will do after being elected president is introducing NAC economic zone reform and become a place similar to the 6th Street in the NAC. Ji Yukeng thought about the chip injected behind his neck, let out a sigh, and opened his hands. I still don't understand. Compared to Wang Hai, everything is clearly terrible, whether it is Federation or Empire. Other than the also mythical secret about immortality, what could interest you here? Once you possess territories, you'll want to possess more. Of course, I don't need to explain this to you, you just need to follow what I say, then. What are you planning to tell me? Is it something inconvenient for other people to know? Ji Yukeng said. It is about that password. Zhang Chen stared into his eyes. I want to carefully recollect how you obtained it. Ji Yukeng paused before he sighed. Is this the question? I can bet you that you'll be disappointed when you hear it. Zhang Chen signaled him to continue. The password was brought to me by a postal man. I was drinking in the bar. He came to find me and said that someone from Federation sent me a mail for me to sign. I was confused. And I was even more confused when I opened the letter. There was a string of symbols along with a detailed explanation of Fallout Shelter 071 as well as a signature. That's it? Zhang Chen stared him, dumbfounded. That's it. Ji Yukeng nodded. His expression was innocent. As I said, you will be disappointed. Zhang Chen scanned the program related to the slavery chip on the EP. From his heart rate, he didn't lie. So you gifted the password to the president? That's right. I thought I could become a confidant, but he wanted to kill me instead. Ji Yukeng's words were mixed with deep hatred. Who sent the letter? Dr. Sunday. Dr. Sun, could it be? Zhang Chen furrowed his brows. From the intelligence collected by Zhao Corporation about the doctor that doesn't age, he previously thought the person may be a digitalized human, but the truth may not be the case. But why? The doctor at the capital. What was his purpose to send the password to Federation's parliament member? Or rather, what was he trying to achieve in making Federation's people purposely leave the diary behind? Ji Yukeng was anxious seeing Zhang Chen didn't speak as he tried to contemplate his thought process. But quickly after, Zhang Chen spoke again. Last question. You gave the password to the president. Don't you long for immortality? Ji Yukeng took a second to process. He didn't think it would be such an irrelevant question, so he mocked himself. I'm just a poor man and an unimportant parliament member in Federation. I work my SS for the stingy poor suckers. Perhaps when I become the president, I will. The gunshots in the distance stopped. The outcome of the battle ended with all the mutated humans eliminated. A total of 215 mutated humans as well 10 mutated dogs all died tragically among the ruins. Nak suffered 2 deaths and 17 injuries. The almost miraculous victory was a historic win in the eyes of the survivors, but the soldiers didn't seem to be too excited. The advantage in equipment meant the battle would be crushing from the start. Zhang Chen personally held a simple burial ceremony for the 2 deceased soldiers. Their body would be shipped back to Wanghai. To the wounded soldiers, as long as they didn't miss an arm or a leg, Nak's medical expertise could treat them. All in all, while the equipment of the mutated humans at this location was inferior to the mutated humans supported by the Dusk Church, but in terms of combatability, the mutated humans were stronger. The Nak research in the Force extracted blood cell samples from the body of the mutated humans and brought them back to the lab at the outpost to conduct an analysis on DNA and metabolism. The appearances of the mutated humans were different compared to the mutated humans in Wanghai. Zhang Chen was especially intrigued. Therefore, he assigned the research task to the researchers. The result was also surprising. The mutated humans here had 6 strands of chromosomes with obvious differences to the mutated humans in GeoCity. FEV virus is also called human genetic fixation virus with the intent to allow the pack citizens to become neo-humans more adaptable to the harsh environment. But since the start of the FEV project, it received the objection from the mainstream society. The pure species believers, humans are destined to be a creature that can win against nature, but not compromise to nature and become a monster. Therefore, the research of the FEV virus was delayed. It was not till before the war did people start to continue the research after digging the information out. The FEV virus culture widespread on Wasteland was mostly the improved version of the original FEV virus. Inside the lab, the researchers responsible for dissecting the mutated human's body reported to Zhang Chen. Other than the difference in appearance compared to the mutated humans in Wanghai, is there anything else that's different? Zhang Chen asked. Of course. The researcher nodded. Other than poorer regeneration ability, the Yukeng mutated humans also possessed extremely strong metabolism, but different from the GeoCity mutated human. Their theoretical lifespan is 3 times the GeoCity mutated humans. 3 times? Zhang Chen was stunned. That's right. The researcher said with certainty. The FEV virus in Yukeng possesses the ability to elongate the DNA telomere. While the technical challenge is great, it is not impossible in theory. The mutated humans' strength and immunity to poison were problematic. To begin with, especially with their cockroach-like regeneration, they could easily adapt on the wasteland. The inability to breed and shortened lifespan were two weaknesses that limited their size. But the mutated humans here's lifespan was longer than humans. It was unbelievable. When Jiang Chen returned to the command room, he found Han Junhui to discuss the strategy on wiping out mutated humans. The first step was to send out reconnaissance soldiers to determine the mutated humans' FEV production base, armory, command, anti-air units, and other critical infrastructures to be destroyed by ER-20. At the same time, the ground force will be supported by order to push to the west bank of Panyang Lake occupied by Guru tribe to free the humans slaved by mutated humans. As to Empire, in the past few days, based on the information sent by our soldiers to Hezong City and capital, I analyzed the Hukong forces. Standing in front of the hologram map, Han Junhui's arms crossed in front of her chest while she orderly explained the complicated relationship between Empire and Guru tribe. Jiang Chen's eyes narrowed after he listened to Han Junhui's analysis. So you're saying Empire used us? 90%. Han Junhui looked to Jiang Chen, then, what are you planning to do? Nothing. They will realize that our operation is not free. A mischievous smile appeared on Jiang Chen's face as he stared at Empire on the map. Using us, they are playing with fire. Chapter 635. Empire no longer in control. Inside the palace, the Emperor and the elders sat around the long table, celebrating. The alcohol on the table was a NAC specialty. The curry chicken and stewed beef canned food were also from the NAC, but there were also specialty dishes from the wasteland. For example, the sauce roasted crab madro with an alluring fragrance, the fury bear brain in the shape of tofu were all the cuisines on the wasteland that people without status could not eat. The supplies inland were plentiful beyond the imagination of Coastal Wanghai. The Emperor and elders toasted in joy. Emperor's strategy is witty. An elder with a full mustache raised his cup and toasted with the Emperor. With this strategy, the NAC force will have to retreat without any gain. The annoying mutated human tribe must also reconsider our relationship. That's right. Emperor is wise. Ha ha ha, my elders. Let's drink. This is premium beer purchased from Wanghai, for the glory of Empire. We'll get drunk today. The Emperor stood up and toasted with each of the elders. Emperor is right. For Empire. Cheers. I'll finish this drink to show my respect. Looking at the elders trying to flatter him, the Empire had a joyful expression on his face but was sneering in his mind. You old foxes. Everyone knows what hideous things you're thinking about in your minds. The witty strategy of borrowing a knife to kill was not the work of the Empire, but a strategy discussed by the elders, and the elders didn't mention any of this and handed the glory to him, just an attempt to please him before he steps down. Empire was a crown abdication. There was 1 year left in the 5-year term. Who would be the next emperor will be appointed by the current emperor. As long as the elders don't all reject, the next emperor would be the wise person appointed by him. He was sitting among them while doing all he can to flatter and please the person that sat in his chair, and the second year after he controlled all power, he no longer would even glance the previous emperor. In Empire, stepping down meant retirement and complete isolation with power. The person wouldn't even have the chance to return to the elders. Thinking that he still had a year of time, the emperor felt melancholic. But he was over it quickly. At least now, he was still the leader of Empire, enjoying the respect and support of the nobles. The chief elder personally poured him a cup of alcohol and the emperor relaxingly took a drink. It is too boring to just flatter each out during the banquet, an elder suggested. Why don't we discuss how to take care of the Guru tribe? We gave them too many special treatments. The inferior people have been complaining. It's okay. Just arrest the people complaining in public. But this is not a long-term strategy. Why doesn't Emperor use this opportunity to take back some of the rights given? An elder carefully observed the Emperor's expression and suggested. No. Federation is currently eyeing our territory with the NAC in the distance. In this critical moment, we must unite the mutated humans and cannibals. After several drinks, the atmosphere lightened and the elders all expressed their perspective. But the emperor was not pleased with the elders' argument, so he said, "My elders, please don't be bothered. Today, Let's enjoy the night and not talk about state affairs. Everyone eat, drink, and don't leave the table full of delicacies and drinks untouched. Haha, Emperor, you're right. Right. Everyone drink and eat. A few elders helped alleviate the situation and held up their cups. When the emperor was a bit tipsy, a soldier ran into the banquet. Greetings, Emperor. There is an emergency I must report. The soldier kneeled down and shouted. The emperor raised his eyebrows but still controlled his mood. Then he said, report now. Emperor, the Nak just declared war. Declared war? Is that it? I know. Get out now. The emperor dismissed him and said in annoyance. He already expected a war between Nak and Guru tribe, and the information from the spy already confirmed his guess. But the soldier was not to be blamed. Such the tactful strategy of borrowing a knife to kill was not something they could guess. The soldier was still hesitant without getting up from the ground. Why are you still here? Do you want the emperor to give you a piece of meat? The elder at the end of the table mocked the soldier. He had the lowest status on the table and his ranking was not high either. He enjoyed making fun of people below him. He used chopsticks and threw a piece of half-eaten chicken leg onto the ground. The banquet table burst out laughing. Seeing his superiors were happy, that elder looked proud too. The red drunken face was chuckling and looked comical. The soldier kneeling on the ground didn't mind the laughter. He gritted his teeth and continued to report. Emperor, Nak's declaration of war is targeted not only on the Guru tribe but the entire empire. The laughter abruptly stopped. The laughter on the face of the elder sitting at the end also froze. Bang! The cup dropped to the ground and broke the silence. The emperor stood up fiercely and stared at the soldier on the ground. Cold sweat instantly took away all the drunkenness, and with shakiness in his voice, he stated, What did you say? Nak declared war on empire. The banquet erupted in noise. No way. How could they declare war on both Guru tribe and empire? Too arrogant. They only have 1,000 people. Their supply line is 600 kilometers long. Fight. We have to teach the uneducated a lesson. How dare they? The old elder's eyes widened as he said with fury, but that airship. Some elders were indecisive. Funny, the massive empire is afraid of one airship, with just 1,000 in force. We only need to use a division force to easily wipe them out. What about Federation? What if they launch a sneak attack against us? The banquet was a mess. The emperor's face was blank while his mouth closed shut without any redness. At the same time, in Nak's military outpost, the Fireball 1 launch vehicles transported by the blimp were ready. The construction robots moved the bundles of missiles beside the launch vehicle with soldiers completing the loading. Nak's soldiers formed organized square formations in the front of the outpost waiting for their command. The shining kinetic skeleton cast a daunting vibe while the survivors in the market witnessed all this in a state of shock. The deafening roar came from the distance. The Aurora 20 just completed its mission and changed into vertical landing mode, landing on the top of the airship. Standing on the watchtower, Zhang Qin's eyes narrowed while observing his force. Beside him, Wang Zhou replied concisely, All FEV virus productions on the ground are destroyed. Any underground units, Fallout Shelter 010, the origin of Guru tribe. Wang Zhou replied, Depth, 1,000 meters. Zhang Chen nodded. Most of the mutated humans on the wasteland could not reproduce, and the FEV virus culture was their eggs. As long as they destroyed them, delete the production data for the virus, they killed the root of the mutated humans. If the Emperor of Empire thought Zhang Chen just wanted to teach the unintelligent Guru tribe a lesson, then he is completely wrong. To the enemy, Nak abides by one principle: wipe them from the surface of the earth. Chapter 636, Dr. Sun. It was an old clinic that sat at the corner of the arena, the ghetto known for its sturdiness and chaos. When Zhao Badong walked into the ghetto, he clearly sensed the atmosphere was drastically different compared to other parts of the arena. People were dressed poorly and had old, broken shirts and trousers hanging on drying lines above the alley, which made the sunlight-less alley appear even darker. Along the way, He put his hand in his right pocket and held on to the pistol. He could sense the unfriendly and even malicious looks from the refugees nearby. It felt like they were thieves assessing their prey. Clearly, this was the land of outlaws. Compared to 6th Street, this place was SHT. Zhao Badong cursed in his mind while stepping into the clinic. A robot was taking reservations at the door. While he was interested in the robot's design, after hesitating for a moment, he resisted the urge to touch it. Number 10, please wait in the waiting area. A sharp electronic screeching noise came from below the metallic exterior, followed by the sound of paper being ripped. A slip of paper with a number popped out from the robot's mouth. Zhao Badong took the paper and scanned the clinic before he walked to the waiting area and sat on a long bench. There were quite a few people in the waiting area, with the majority of them looking poor. Empire had a lot of people. It also had a lot of poor people. Dr. Sun's clinic charged low fees, so the clients were mostly poor or stingy lone travelers. Because of this, the clinic had a great reputation in the ghetto of the capital. It didn't take Zhao Badong too much effort to find the place. With this opportunity, he examined the customers in the clinic. There were humans, mutated humans, and odd people covered in capes refusing to show their faces. The green-skinned giant in front took up 2 seats. He crossed his arms while waiting in frustration. His amber-colored eyes resembled a death claw, but he wasn't as visibly vicious as a death claw. The mutated human noticed Zhao Badong's gaze and stared back at him. Zhao Badong looked away. In Empire, anyone disrespectful to mutated humans would be at risk of getting punished. They referred to this as equality, although everyone, including most of their own, considered it absurd. There was no need to create a scene here, and the mutated humans wouldn't be around much longer. With that thought in his head, he turned his gaze to the clock. Number 10. Finally, he heard his name from inside the room. Zhao Badong stood up and headed to the room. When he saw Director Sun, he was shocked. Just as the information described him, the doctor working in this clinic for 10 years still looked 20 years old. What's the problem? Without looking up, Dr. Sun spun his pen and asked. Addicted to jet arm. Zhao Badong obediently extended his arm while he scanned the room. No need to look. There's nothing expensive here, Dr. Sun said without looking up. Zhao Badong was shocked that the doctor noticed his gaze without looking up. You're mistaken, I'm not here to steal. Zhao Badong laughed awkwardly. Dr. Sun's hand holding a detector stopped. His finally lifted his buried head, and his apathetic eyes looked at Zhao Badong. Is that so? I'd hope you're here to steal and not here with some other purpose. Zhao Badong didn't respond. He pointed the detector at his pulse before stats came up on the screen. Jet addiction is recent. Yes, you don't have to purposely get high to see me. Medicine is scarce in the wasteland. Even if your employer is rich, it's shameful to waste. Dr. Sun tossed his notebook to the side. Now, explain your intentions. Zhao Badong sighed reluctantly, knowing his cover was blown. Aren't you going to prescribe medicine for me first? A jet stopper was thrown into his lap. Zhao Badong flipped over to see the price tag, and his eyebrows twitched. 200 crystals. This guy prescribed him the most expensive medicine. Speak your mind, the doctor said expressionlessly. With someone's request, I was hoping you could accompany me to a place. Zhao Badong did his best to make his wording sound less suspicious, but in the end, he realized that regardless of how he said it, it was no different from declaring a kidnapping. What if I said no? Zhao Badong cautiously scanned the door. Seeing as there was no one eavesdropping, Zhao Badong said, "This is for your benefit. Believe it or not, this place is about to be gone soon." Dr. Sun was silent for a long time before he then asked, "Then tell me why your employer wants to see me." Our leader suspects you're a digitalized human. Of course, this doesn't mean we're malicious. We just want to confirm your program. Before Zhao Badong could finish, Dr. Sun burst out laughing. Zhao Badong shrugged. He didn't mind a disrespectful laugh, but he just looked at the doctor in search of an answer. Go, or not go, is that what your leader told you? Haha, not bad. A digitalized human is a good way to disguise. Please don't continue, Zhao Badong immediately said. Afraid you'll find out too much? Sun Yi glanced at the anxious visitor with a grin. His unaged face had the maturity belonging only to elders. That's right. Zhao Badong was honest. If Zhang Chen hadn't told him the specifics, that meant Zhang Chen knew his identity. If Zhao Badong learned about something he shouldn't have, it might not necessarily be beneficial for a small character like him. Dr. Sun didn't make it difficult for him. He only shook his head and paused for a moment before he slowly said, I could go with you. Zhao Badong was relieved. Then please. But the time is not now. Zhao Badong's expression froze, and words came out with difficulty. Why? It was hard to take a person out of the capital by force. Although this was the ghetto, the outlaw land of the capital, the district outside the capital was patrolled by guards. Even if he was a great fighter, it wouldn't be easy to take someone out of the heavily guarded city. In the past 10 years, I've saved a lot of people. Out of everyone, 9 of them suffered gun wounds, Dr. Sun said calmly. To be honest, regarding your leader, or the treasure pursued by all people with power, I've completed my research. My previous plan was to make the secret public so everyone could share the wealth exchanged by the blood of the minority. The wasteland could quickly regain its population from before the war, and with the efforts of humanity, the wasteland would be more prosperous, more united, and more pleasant than before the war. We'd work together to create a desirable future. But when I woke up and walked out of the abandoned fallout shelter, I suddenly changed my mind. It wasn't because of the despairing barrenness, but something more depressing. Zhao Badong was curious what his secret was, but his dry throat couldn't make any sounds. You plan to attack this place, right? Dr. Sun looked at Zhao Badong expressionlessly. Then let me see. Destroying a city that provides protection for tens of thousands of people, is your leader worthy of the secret in my hands? If not, I'm prepared to take the secret in my grave. Chapter 637. The Fuse. The battle ensued. Outside the military outpost, white smoke drifted up at the missile launch grounds, accompanied by blinding flames. Missiles soared into the air, one by one. Target hit. Covered Unit 14. Kill confirmed. Adjusting coordinates, 114,23. Smoke covered. Over. Roger. Number 3 cannon fire. Inside the control room, the hologram map collected by Aurora 20 reflected real-time battle information to Zhang Chen. The leading force of the mutated humans arrived 5 kilometers away from the water treatment plant, but under the barrage of missiles by the NAC and the attack of kinetic skeleton soldiers, they were completely wrecked. But the mutated humans naturally didn't understand fear. NAC's airstrikes on the FEV virus production bases clearly infuriated the mutated humans. Guru Tribe mobilized a division of forces totaling 5,000 people equipped with artillery, trucks with anti-air cannons, and modified pickup trucks equipped with armor and machine guns. They mobilized to the NAC outpost. The leading force included the strongest warriors of Guru Tribe. This included lead mutated humans with power hammers, machine gunners wielding steel armors, and mutated dogs strapped with nuclear grenades. But the complete elimination of the leading force brought the commander of the mutated humans some clarity. He didn't order the troops to just swarm the target, but instead, he ordered them to scatter based on the geography of the city. He sent out slaves and mutated humans to launch some fake attacks against the NAC outpost, but it was all inconsequential. For some reason, NAC didn't display its full power from the beginning, which gave the mutated humans commander the false impression that they were equally matched. But Empire didn't have this illusion. The unaltered brains of humans were clearly more intelligent than mutated humans. Empire also mobilized 2 divisions totaling 10,000, deployed around the rural area of Hukan. It was half of Empire's forces. Such a massive military attack was the first in Hukan, but compared to the brainless rush tactics used by the mutated humans, Empire's soldiers were more cautious and much more devious. They built defense structures along the borders of the rural area, used reinforced steel to fortify abandoned buildings, dug out trenches to separate the battlefield, and connected the buildings with tunnels underground. Needless to say, their tactics were extremely effective against heavy firepower, and it also suited the raiders' battle style of fighting independently. From the beginning, their stance was that they would defend their territory with their lives. Jiang Chen didn't mind Empire's actions. He didn't plan to use fire suppression against Empire. A Fireball 1 missile cost 100 credits, and based on the conversion rate of the 6th Street, it was around 500 crystals. With 2,000 rounds of missiles, it would be equivalent to scattering money, although it would make for nice fireworks. There was no need to burn money against Empire. To dismantle this skyscraper, they just needed to think of a strategy to attack the bottom of the skyscraper disdained by Empire. There was no need to fight to the death against this lousy crowd. Inside the bar at the capital, rare bottles of alcohol were arranged on the corroded table. Two people sat across each other while downing the drinks. I think that increasing one's population to increase power is too rogue. The mercenary with a hat was drunk. He began to talk, and with purposeful probing by Zhao Badong, he started to blurt out gibberish. It was his 7th day inside the capital. Zhao Badong found the mercenary who led him through the door and said he would treat him to drinks. Alcohol was great. It could numb tense nerves. No one on the wasteland disliked it. On the table, Zhao Badong successfully learned his name in addition to other information. He was Zhao Hu, a mercenary active between Huking and Wu City who mostly ran with the merchant fleets between two cities. He lived a poor, drunken life. While he could be witty, he was unintelligent in nature, which made him easy to manipulate. Oh? Zhao Badong took a sip of the alcohol and looked at him with a grin. Your perspective is quite unique. Zhao Hu felt flattered. He laughed and said, the people here are weird. A lot of newbies who come here for the first time don't understand why mutated humans are willing to live peacefully with humans. Zhao Badong had a brighter smile. Please explain. Then he waved his hand at the bartender to signal 2 more drinks. You realize that aside from poor hobos inside the ghetto, everyone's lives are okay? But people aren't happy. Of course, I'm referring to people who live here, not travelers who find fun everywhere. Zhao Hu's intoxicated face revealed a mysterious smile. He got closer to Zhao Badong as he said, do you want to know why? Of course. Zhao Badong grinned. They believe in a weird standard of equality. The minority receive more special treatment, and the majority receive less power, yet they refer to this as equality. Equality with the species being the unit. I'm surprised. Is the emperor not human? He's the one cutting the cake, not making the cake. Zhao Hu burped. He took another swig without hiding anything. The emperor is selected from the elders, so do you expect him to eat the cake? Don't dream about it. Even if 2 walls of the arena collapse and mutated humans kill a few more humans, they'll continue to live lavish lives. I'm thankful for the NAC merchant fleets. Otherwise, we couldn't eat food even if we have the money. Discussing the emperor and elders in the public already drew the attention of the bartender and the people around them. A lot of people afraid of trouble had already left. Right now, a mutated human, who just finished hunting, was sitting at an empty table nearby and ordered cheap alcohol. Zhao Badong, who sat across him, laughed and glanced nonchalantly at the dumb-looking mutated human. He shook his head. Let's not talk about the emperor. I want to listen to your opinion on the species with special rights. I have no comment. Those bastards just eat and sleep every day and only know how to force slaves who are afraid to resist grow mutated fruits. They know nothing else. I heard that the FEV virus will turn people's head into a mess. Haha, they aren't to be blamed. And the elder from Guru tribe, who would worship a cancer patient with a tumor on his back as a god. Slap. A loud slap to the face interrupted him. Zhao Badong, who was sitting across him, had already disappeared. The voice of Zhao Hu speaking gibberish to his bottle of alcohol had entered the ears of the mutated human. The giant named Andy stood up as he slapped the table, and he gave Zhao Hu's forehead a hard slap. With his back on the cold concrete ground, Zhao Hu instantly sobered up. He barely managed up to support himself up from the ground as his bruised face was covered in fear. The elder was the elder of mutated humans, the god in every Guru tribe. Even discussing him in public was viewed as disrespectful by the mutated humans. No, I was just drunk. Zhao Hu couldn't tend to his wounds as he crawled back onto the table while looking at the mutated human walking toward him. He hadn't brought a gun with him. Even if he did bring one, he wouldn't dare to shoot at a mutated human here. A mutated human beating him to death would be locked up at most. If he killed a mutated human, he would be enslaved by the mutated humans. It was even more terrifying than death. Andy smiled menacingly. He stepped out of the bar with his fist clenched toward the human on the ground. As everyone watched, the mutated human stepped onto the mercenary. He swung his fist and punched the mercenary in the face. Crack! Zhao Hu seemed to hear his nose bone cracking, but with his dazed head, he couldn't even scream. After a few punches, every punch landed directly, and the green fist was stained with blood. Stop hitting him. He's almost dead, someone whispered, but when met with the mutated human's vicious eyes, that person looked away. Anyone disrespectful to the elder is disrespectful to Guru tribe. Anyone disrespectful to Guru tribe must die. And he bathed in the countless looks of hatred and fear while he sat on top of Zhao Hu. He laughed psychotically while he swung his powerful fists. Roar! The mutated humans cheered on the warrior. Perhaps they weren't really respectful of that elder. Perhaps they just instinctively craved violence and killing, and the fear present in people's eyes promoted their extremism. The guard walked to Andy, but Andy was unafraid. Even if he killed the human here, he would at most spend a few days in prison without any prison guard daring to treat him unfairly. Maybe not long after, the leader of Guru tribe would negotiate with the officials of Empire to demand his release. His amber-colored pupils scanned the crowd. He triumphantly exposed his fangs with one word coming out of his ugly mouth: cowards. Until the miserable-looking mercenary stopped breathing, no one stopped his atrocious actions. But then his expression froze. His eyes met a gun hidden in the crowd, and the smile belonged to a human. Bang! The sound of a pistol broke through the noise of the market. There were deafening screams instantly. Someone was killed, and he laid in a pool of blood. His widened eyes were written with disbelief. He couldn't believe he would die in Empire's capital. The guards looked around without a clue. They attempted to find the shooter, but it was futile in the massive crowd. The angry mutated human shoved everyone, beating the innocent crowd while trying to find the murderer who fired the shot. Along with the mass of people, Zhao Badong disappeared at the end of the market. The dead Andy would never know that his death was the tipping point to the collapse of this empire, and the same scene was happening in every corner of Empire. Chapter 638, Insurgents. Inside the palace, the emperor sat on his dragon chair and elders stood on both sides. In the middle was a mutated human covered in deathclaw fur. In mutated human society, only a clan leader of 10,000 could wear clothes made of deathclaw fur. My people are in a bloodbath against Nak invaders in the front lines. And you cowards, are curled up behind the bunker. Is this the glory you referred to? This rude roar made the tiles of the palace shake. The emperor on the dragon chairs had a grave face, but he couldn't say a single aggressive word against the discourteous green-skinned man. The prosperity of Empire required the support of mutated humans. When he considered the bigger picture, he couldn't break ties with Guru tribe. The emperor hid his anger behind his black pupils. I'll order the frontline forces to accelerate the attack against Nak. No need. The mutated human 10,000 clan leader swung his hand and glanced the emperor and guards with contempt. Just let your cowards continue to hide behind the bunkers. Useless people should stay where they belong. The battlefield belongs to warriors. Our people will tear apart the people who dare to offend Guru tribe. But the 10,000 clan leader's words took a sharp turn and he stared at the emperor directly in the eyes. He fiercely said, I want to ask you, regarding the unfair treatment received by the mutated humans, what's going on? Unfair? What the fuck? How do you want this to be fairer? More special treatment? The emperor didn't say anything, but the guards by the pillar were almost furious. They had never seen a mutated human this shameless. I will order the soldiers to search for the murderers, the emperor said. The blood of 154 mutated humans needs to be washed by 154 criminals. The 10,000 clan leader gave a bloodthirsty laugh. I know, the emperor replied. I hope you know, or else I'll let you know. His amber pupils were as bloodthirsty as a death claws. He looked at the Emperor threateningly before he turned around and left with the mutated human soldiers surrounding him. When the green-skinned things left, the Emperor smashed the table and cursed out, "These monsters, they can't just bully us like this." The Emperor and elders of Empire were all raiders before. Their thug nature was merely hidden by their glamorous clothes. "Emperor, what should we do?" an elder asked with a bitter smile. The soldiers couldn't even find one murderer, let alone 154 murderers. Those people clearly had a plan, otherwise, they wouldn't have committed 154 murders in 3 days. It was a conspiracy against the friendship between Empire and the mutated humans. Anyone could easily see that. Aside from the simple-brained mutated humans, the Emperor hadn't been this bothered by the intelligence of the bastards. A simple conspiracy could make them start a war against Nak, and the Nak could use tactics to force them to stand on the side opposing Empire. A silent atmosphere lingered in the palace. At that moment, someone broke the silence. "Emperor, I have a strategy." An elder walked up. The elders all looked at him with shock. This elder was the least respected among all the elders, and he always sat at the end of the banquet table. He normally didn't have the opportunity to speak during meetings, but now, since no one had any good ideas, no one spoke against him. The Emperor thought for a moment with his head lowered before he finally remembered the name of this elder. He slowly said, "Chen Lin. Go ahead." Chen Lin walked up 2 stairs and smiled with a grimace. He suggested to the Emperor, "The mutated humans believe their rights were violated, so we could just comfort them like usual." "But what could we give them?" the Emperor asked, frustrated. "Only 154 heads. Since they need the murderers, we'll just hand them over." With ferocity in his voice, Chen Lin looked directly at the Emperor. The Emperor raised his eyebrows, not understanding what Chen Lin meant, but then he caught on and instantly understood the deeper meaning. Since mutated humans' brains couldn't distinguish the murderers, then were they just going to kill a few random people and use their heads to comfort them? Where would we find 154 people? The Emperor's fingers tapped the armrest of the dragon chair as he muttered to himself. With a grimace, the elder walked beside the Emperor and whispered into his ear, "There are 10,000 slaves working in Donggang Plantation. 154 missing slaves is nothing at all. How long will this war last?" Standing on top of the wall, Sun Ziru dangled her legs while picking up binoculars to observe the horizon in the distance. In the distance, the sun was sliding west. Nak unleashed 1,000 combustion missiles on the mutated humans' zone of control and suppressed them within the city. Based on the casualty reports from Aurora 20's reconnaissance, the mutated humans' 5,000 division lost about a third of its troops with all armored units destroyed. But Nak still hadn't served the final blow. They maintained the illusion that they were fairly matched. Before the arrival of the signal of Empire's collapse, Nak needed the mutated humans to maintain their arrogance. Next to Sun Ziru, Zhang Chen carefully observed the side of her face. Sometimes, he thought she was extremely similar to her sister. Zhang Chen then shifted his gaze to the distance. "It depends how well the Hunter Division is doing." Han Junhui stepped onto the wall and walked behind him. "The 10,000 slaves in Donggang Plantation are uprising." When he heard his long-awaited message, a victorious smile surfaced on his face. With the Hunter Division's purposeful provocation, the tension between Empire citizens and officials was pushed to its maximum, and the foolish idea of sacrificing slaves was suggested by an elder bribed by Zhao Badong. When this news spread out between the slaves, even the numbest people couldn't suppress the fury in the bottoms of their hearts. They just needed a person to lead and a person to give them a few guns before they would naturally choose the option to riot. Nak didn't need to send out a single troop. "Good. In this case, we should start moving." "Yes." Han Junhui nodded and turned around. Sun Ziru stood up from the edge of the wall, patted the dust off her hand and looked at Zhang Chen. "Finally going to start fighting?" With a smile, Zhang Chen raised his head and gazed at the steel airship. Time to display our true power." In the lingering sunset glow, this was the first time the hammer of order was stained with a menacing vibe. Just like the signal produced from a conductor's baton, The prelude to the fall of Empire was about to begin. Chapter 639, The Hammer of Order. No humans wanted to die. Slaves were no exception. Donggang was inhabited before. Shortly after the building of the wall, it became a plantation for mutated fruits. Later on, it became a plantation worked on by slaves. There were criminals, people captured by raiders, poor people, or people purely in debt working there. They could withstand the plantation work, and they could withstand supervisors cursing and hitting them as long as they weren't slaves of mutated humans. Once they worked their time, they could obtain their freedom and become free. But recently, a rumor spread among the slaves. Mutated humans were being murdered in Empire. Empire planned to use the heads of slaves to calm the anger of mutated humans. No one believed this at first since it was completely absurd. While they were the slaves of Empire, they were still citizens of Empire. Empire had the right to exploit them, but it had no right to take their lives away. That was their boundary, the only boundary they had since being exploited. But one night, some people came from the capital with the plan of taking away 154 slaves. Needless to say, the people executing the orders didn't have a brain. Everyone in the territory knew of the rumors everywhere concerning violence against the 154 mutated humans. Combined with the rumor from before, the intention of taking away 154 slaves now was obvious. The plantation workers were completely enraged. No one wanted to die because of this absurd reason. Therefore, the glorious uprising started. The supervisors and guards had guns while the slaves only had hoes and shovels, but that was fine. This was the apocalypse. The insurgents were divided into two groups. One group blew up the wall of the plantation, and another group used hoes and shovels to ambush the patrol route. Survivors on the wasteland learned how horrific zombies could be at night. Even Deathclaws had to fear the zombies. They would chew away any living creature. When the zombies broke through the wall, the group paid a price of 10 lives to break through the guards' chests. They picked up their guns and attacked the armory according to plan. The plantation was in complete chaos. The guards rushed to the collapsed wall and used barbed wire to create a line of defense. They used rifles to kill the zombies swarming inside the plantation. Inside this chaotic environment, no one noticed the patrolling guards being killed, and no one noticed the slaves with guns breaking into the armory. The mobilized slaves flooded the armory. They went from bare-handed rioters to fully equipped insurgents and began attacking the Empire army. The hundreds of guards and supervisors were just a boat in the middle of a hurricane in the face of the anger of 10,000 slaves. They were quickly flooded by bullets from the insurgents and the claws of zombies. After a bloodbath and paying a price of 500 lives, the insurgents used barbed wires and trucks to block the hole in the wall and cleared out the zombies that invaded the plantation. 431 heads were cut off, including the official sent from Empire. The flag of Empire was burnt and converted into the survivors' own flag. Just like a spark, the riot at Donggang Plantation ignited the flame of separation. Below the steel airship, the electromagnetic cannon named the Hammer of Order lowered slightly and aimed directly at the mutated human's zone of control. Suddenly, blue electric arcs jumped between the tracks. Like a bright light, it illuminated the darkness. The mutated humans inside the bunkers gazed at the unnatural light source with confusion. At the same time, the NAC soldiers hidden in the bunkers silently reloaded their clips and opened tactical images on their helmets. Firing coordinate is adjusted. Capacitor is charged. Bomb loaded. Fire. Following Captain Zhang Chen's orders, the gunner opened the safety and pressed the red button. Buzz. Like the vibration of a cicada's wings, the screeching, buzzing sound was clear even inside the airship. Water molecules were electrolyzed and oxygen was ozonized. There were ripples in the air close to the electromagnetic pulse cannon accompanying the electric blue arcs. In the mutated human's eyes, the blinding blue light instantly turned the night sky into bright daylight, and a trail of orange light instantly flashed out. Boom! The 100-kilogram bomb smashed into the ground. Just like a bullet hitting jelly, the empty shell popped out onto the soil and threw everything on the ground into the air. Sand and soil covered the area. Broken shrapnel and stone shards blew by like a hurricane and shredded everything in the eye of the storm, then buried the world. When the dust scattered, the bloodthirstiness in the pupils of the mutated humans faded, and only deep fear remained as they watched the massive crater in the middle of their zone of control. What is that? Why didn't the NAC use this before? Only two questions circled in the mutated human soldiers, but before they could react to this outcome, a hailstorm of missiles dropped down. The combustion materials danced in the air and submerged everything it touched into a fiery sea. The extent of the fire was far greater and violent compared to previous times. The mutated humans began to retreat, but it was too late. The fire stopped, and the NAC soldiers charged. With the assistance of Aurora 20 airstrikes, they started to reap the lives of the mutated humans. The force of 5,000 people collapsed in less than half an hour of battle. The mutated humans escaped to the city and jumped into the river. The scene was tragic. At the same time, the pursuing force happened to encounter the mutated humans' 2nd Division, and an intense crossfire took place in the forested area. Every 10 minutes, a 100-kilogram bomb rained down on the mutated humans. In response to the terrifying heaven cannon and barrage of missiles, the mutated humans had to scatter. But once they scattered, their numerical advantage instantly disappeared. Faced with soldiers in kinetic skeletons, the mutated humans with just magazine clips and fur on their bodies were destined to face a one-sided slaughter. Kill them all. That was the only order given to the NAC soldiers. There was no mercy for the bloodthirsty mutated humans. NAC didn't need mutated human captives nor people to capture mutated humans, so there was no reason to accept a surrender. When the first light shone from the horizon and scattered the ray of dawn, the blood in the soil was the first to be lit up. It extended from the shambles of the water treatment plant, extending all the way to the west of Panyang Lake. Chapter 640, The Doomsday of Guru Tribe. While NAC was launching a full-scale attack against Guru Tribe, Empire's commander at the front lines realized their opportunity might have come. The hailstorm of missiles was dominating, but they couldn't have an infinite supply. Since NAC had 1,000 soldiers, their shortage in numbers meant they couldn't fight on both lines. But at the critical point of fending off an external enemy, there was a servant coup taking place in Empire. Aside from the arena in the capital, almost all territories lit up with uprising smoke. The Donggang plantation had the largest uprising. The slaves not only occupied the armory and executed the supervisors of the plantation, but they also hung heads up on the walls. At the same time, Federation pushed their mechanized division next to Gang River, eager to move against Empire on the brink of collapse. The two sides had fought in the open and in the dark for many years. This was Empire's most tumultuous period in 20 years, so their archenemy naturally wouldn't let go of this heaven-sent opportunity. They had been drooling over Empire's vast territory and massive population. If they could annex Empire's land, including the territory east of Gang River, into its borders, Federation would indeed become the most powerful force in the province. Faced with external and internal threats, the elders immediately ordered a retreat. The two Empire divisions had to give up on the perfect opportunity to attack the NAC outpost. With their backs against their mutated human allies who suffered an excruciating defeat, they had to retreat from the defense bunkers they just built. July 1st marked over half a month since the NAC soldiers set foot in Hukan. They used the cover of the night to fly their flag of order over Guru Tribe's land. With the assistance of missiles, NAC's forces broke through Guru Tribe's line of defense. In the final moment of battle, their reserves of missiles and bombs were all exhausted, but they were okay without any support. Their victory was already certain. With a population of 80,000 mutated humans, over 50,000 died under missile fire. The remainder died, escaped, or fell under the airstrike of Aurora 20. The 10,000 clan leader died. When he rushed out from the shadows swinging his power hammer, he wanted to vent his anger through brute force. But he didn't manage to kill anyone. His head was cut off by Zhang Chen's private force captain, Li Wang, with a dagger. Guru tribe's elder took his confidants and supplies to escape into the fallout shelter. They locked the door. Zhang Chen's orders on the mutated humans acting like turtles were concise. Bury them. Zhang Chen wasn't interested in the FEV virus anyways. It made no difference whether it was buried or destroyed. With the size of the mutated humans, they couldn't remain in the hibernation chamber. Even if the fridges of the fallout shelter were stuffed with food, it would last them 10 years at most. When their food became depleted, there could only be two endings: starve to death, or death through internal conflict. Regardless of the ending, only despair and death awaited them. That was the punishment for the atrocities they committed under the tolerance of Empire. Soldiers in power armor threw the mini-nukes they confiscated from Guru tribe into the end of the tunnel underground. Then Zhang Chen pressed the detonate button. The high temperature even melted the surface of the fallout shelter. A scorching light erupted from the ground like an active volcano and brought burning radiation dust to the surface. The explosion shook the ground. Even the capital, tens of kilometers from Penyang Lake, could sense the tremor. The 1,000-meter tunnel collapsed and buried the fallout shelter stored with FEV virus data underground eternally. With the cheers of the slaves, NAC soldiers took control of mutated human territory. 20,000 slaves were all freed, and Guru tribe was renamed Golden River Farm and categorized as a NAC economic zone in Hukan. All citizens could join NAC at their will, record their information to obtain an identity card, receive nutrient supply aid, and wait for the next arrangements. To ease the process, under Zhang Chen's directions, Wang Zhou selected 500 reserves from the villages beside the water treatment plant who joined NAC from the beginning. A small amount of leadership from 3rd Division soldiers was provided to maintain the order of the farm while nutrient supply was distributed. The raw ingredients for nutrient supply were all available, and the mutated humans' warehouses were filled with mutated fruit, so Zhang Chen didn't feel any pain in consuming 20,000 nutrient supplies per day. Some of the land already planted with mutated fruit trees were divided among the slaves. While these freed slaves were still planting mutated fruit, free citizens with property worked much harder. They worked for mutated humans before, but now, they worked for next month's food. The tent of Guru tribe elder was bulldozed, and NAC's construction robots rebuilt a concrete command post at the same spot. Zhang Chen was inside the command post discussing next steps with Han Junhua. Empire's 1st Division is currently in a stalemate on the Gang River Bridge against Federation. From the position of the cannons, it is highly likely it will escalate into a military conflict. Picking the fruit while we're working on Empire. Federation has a good plan. Aside from a standoff, did they do anything else? Zhang Chen didn't seem worried and laughed instead. No. Han Junhua shook her head. They should be waiting for us to finish resting. While we demolish Empire's land forces, they'll cut the meat behind their backs. Han Junhua nodded. Her calm eyes cast a rational light. That's right. So your suggestion is, if General is planning to include Federation in NAC's territory, how much meat they cut from Empire doesn't really affect us. Makes sense. A smile surfaced on Zhang Chen's face, then he changed the topic. What are the movements of the other 3 divisions? Empire's 3rd Division retreated to the capital for defense, while Empire's 4th Division is contracting its line of defense. They're clearing out local insurgents. Empire's 2nd Division moved to Donggang Plantation and surrounded the local insurgents with cannons and mortars. But due to the frequent activity of zombies and mutants nearby and lack of ammunition, the defense still remains intact while the attack caused sizable casualties to the insurgents. The local insurgents requested assistance from us through radio. Zhang Chen only contemplated for 2 seconds before he strategized the attack. Respond to their request for assistance. Send Aurora 20 to strike Empire's 2nd Division. Before the next batch of supplies arrives, we still need them to waste some more time. Yes. Chapter 641. The business opportunity behind the war. NAC's declaration of war against Empire caused an earthquake in Hukan, but a more destructive earthquake occurred in the 6th Street hundreds of kilometers away. The morning of the 3rd day, when the day just broke, The 6th Street Bank was crowded with a massive group of people. Compared to the survivors in ragged clothes in Hukin, these people's hairstyle and fashion was much more glamorous. Their faces were also filled with excitement and joy. 8 in the morning, the bell of the hour rang from the bell tower. The instant the sign changed from 2, the crowd began to move. Fouquet, don't push me. Are you rushing to reincarnate? Why are you pushing? People in the front can't even walk. Don't cut the line. Fouquet, where's your courtesy? The guards already prepared yellow lines to separate the crowds into lines to maintain order. Because of the existence of newspapers, they received the success from the front line at the earliest time, while at the same time, multiple newspapers of the Nakal had the same headline. Zhang Chen's iron seal was printed along with the headline. Underneath the headline, the 6th Street Bank analyst assessed Hukin population as well as the most critical investment value. With the backup of the military government, the rating was of course A+. It wasn't because Zhang Chen was trying to fool the 6th Street investors, because Hang City's Merchant Alliance also gave a similar rating of A. Compared to the coastal area of Wanghai, the population and radiation level of the soil were both higher than inland. Only the military government-controlled Shangxiang town's soil quality was better. Therefore, the plantations in Nak territory had relatively poor performance. With the increase in population, including the 6th Street, all the Wanghai survivors consumed an astronomical amount of nutrient supply. Since not everyone could afford to eat actual food each meal, most of the people's consumption consisted of the disgusting nutrient supply. But with the average spending of the population also rising, most of the people could afford nutrient supply above B grade, and the ingredient of the B grade nutrient supply was the basic produce of the wasteland. Mutated fruit. The mutant pasture recently popularized in Nak also required consumption of a large number of mutated fruits as the feed for long-haired pig. Not only mutated fruits, karm tree sap, bullet shell grains, and other ingredients also had high demands in the 6th Street. Therefore, all the investors acutely captured 2 keywords from the newspaper: labor and land. With those 2 things, whether it was mutated fruit or karm tree sap, the demand could be satisfied, and because of this, the investors were eager to take out the cash from their pockets and rush to foot the bill of the war. It was the same as the last time when the war bond was sold. Chunan sat at the spot by the window while eating buns, drinking soy milk, and reading through the newspaper on the table. Zhao Chenwu sat across him. The council member that slashed the boss of Zhao Corporation woke up early every morning to not miss the breakfast at the council building cafeteria. War is always the catalyst for the economy. Chunan stuffed the bun into his mouth while glancing at the jam-packed group of people outside with a grin. I cannot agree more. Zhao Chenwu nodded. The bank sat beside the council building, and the line extended from the door of the bank all the way to the square inches front of the council building. The people swinging their bills had higher morale for the war than the soldiers unleashing bullets in the bunkers 600 kilometers away. The war against Guru tribe consumed around 1 million in credits for the cost of bullets, missiles, bombs, and other supplies. But the war was only for 2 days before more than half of the 1 million credits were recovered. No. They even made some money. With the money from the investors, NAC could send more orders to the military factories. At the same time, the investors spending money in Hukin will invest more credits there to build farms, construct factories on NAC's colony, and bring more prosperity to NAC. When Chunan thought about this, the usually calm Chunan was particularly delighted. Zhao Chenwu, on the other hand, was more collected. It was not because he had an indifferent attitude. It was because he laughed enough last night. The bigger companies with a positive relationship with NAC didn't need to be like the investors outside, lining up at the bank door. They had special VIP windows to purchase a large amount of land. Although Zhao Corporation mostly focused on the food business, they maintained a segment of their business in nutrient supply. With 1,000 acre of high-quality soil in Golden River Farm, when he finished calling Zhang Chen yesterday, he almost fell down from his chair due to happiness. But despite being happy, In order to best develop the farm 600 kilometers outside, he still had urgent matters to discuss with Chunan. Speaking of which, the airship is indeed great. Zhao Qianwu exclaimed while looking at the people outside. If the airship can be used in commercial transportation, we will no longer need to engage in crossfire with the raiders along the way. When Chunan heard Zhao Qianwu's words, he found it comical. He had worked with this guy for quite a period of time and he knew exactly what he was thinking. Although the old fox's eyes were looking out the window, his attention was on him. Okay, you know it is pretty hard to obtain helium. Before we can meet the military demand, we don't have plans to open the production for a private airship. Zhao Qianwu looked awkward having been caught red-handed by Chunan. He chuckled and continued to ask without shame, what about hydrogen? Without helium, we can use hydrogen as a replacement. Since we are floating above the clouds, the probability of an accident is low. It should be okay if I order a few hydrogen airships. While a hydrogen airship was more dangerous, from a cost perspective, transporting by air costed much less than transporting by land. As long as the accident rate was controlled below 1%, even with a few accidents, it was a profitable situation. You're not afraid of death, eh? Chunan glanced at him. Are you sure it is safer to float in the air? The raiders even dared to shoot the NAC blimps. They won't let you go free either. Don't worry, we'll bear any loss. Zhao Qianwu used a negotiating tone. That's enough, there is nothing to discuss here. Chunan dismissed the idea before putting the last bun in his mouth. But if we do have that plan, we'll notify you immediately. With Chunan's firm stance, Zhao Qianwu had no other choice. Please and thank you. Chapter 642, Better Wish for Luck. An airship was indeed great. When they saw NAC's steel airship and the supply blimp sending ammunition 600 kilometers away, all the merchants traveling at the 6th Street acutely observed this point. Due to the 600 kilometers distance to transport from Hukeng to Wanghai, the raiders or mutants along the way would usually cause sizable damage to the merchant fleets. Based on the road condition of the wasteland, anything sold in Wanghai from Hukeng would cost at least double. But with the existence of an airship, the situation would drastically be different. Some merchants even considered ordering a few private airships from the 6th Street military factory. While they didn't have the money for the steel version, the normal blimp version would be fine. But the only obstacle was helium. Because of the nuclear fusion power station, helium was abundant before the war. But today, after the war, obtaining helium was as difficult as ascending into the air. Without helium and a hydrogen blimp being too dangerous, they had to put a hold on the idea for now. In NAC, helium was a strategic resource. Fortunately, the modern world was dumping helium to the market as the strategic reverse for blimps. AS Helium Strategic Reserve, built in 1925, consisted of 30% of the world's helium reserve, but followed by the blimp making an exit from military operations. The reserve cost a large maintenance bill per year. Therefore, the Congress made the decision to sell all the helium 15 years ago, and this decision made helium in the global market extremely cheap, with price 20 times below its actual value. And because of this, Zhongchen could obtain large amounts of helium to aid the production in the apocalypse. But if the production of commercial blimps was made available, the liquid helium he brought from the modern world would not be enough. There were approximately 500 merchant fleets that conducted trade across long distances at the 6th Street. If they were to maintain 500 blimps, the helium consumed per day would be enough to build another airship. Before the helium production could be resolved, Zhongchen had no plan to make the helium reserve available. After discussion with Chunan, NAC decided to establish 2 air transportation cargoes between Wanghai and Hukeng with 2 new 300 tons large blimps. This route would be a supplement to the land trade route to provide transportation service for the larger companies. The blimps would also provide direct transportation to the survivors traveling between the 2 locations with a cost. 5 days passed since Guru tribe ceased to exist. Empire and Federation maintained their stalemate across the river. Donggang plantation insurgents desperately tried to hold their ground with the siege of Empire's army. With NAC's arrival, The entire Yukon turned into a mess. Contrary to Empire's chaotic state, NAC-controlled territory was pleasant. Golden River Farm resumed its production with the slaves of mutated humans turned into the owner of the land and began building houses in NAC's designated area. Inside the farm, businessmen in suits could be occasionally seen accompanied by a few mercenaries. They were mostly investors of the 6th Street and luckily purchased land from the bank. The moment they obtained their land permit, the merchants all hopped onto the newly opened airship route and headed to Yukon 600 kilometers away. Brought along with them were concrete, steel, graphene pipelines, and other construction materials. The walls of Golden River Farm were reinforced and a small market sprouted from the ground. The seed of order was planted. It wouldn't take long before prosperity began to germinate. While Golden River Farm was undergoing its rebuilding phase, Empire under tremendous stress finally sent an ambassador out to Zhongchen, expressing their desire for freedom. However, Zhongchen with an advantage would not agree. "Get your emperor to see me. Perhaps I will let him keep his palace and let him continue to be the emperor of that arena, or else, tell him to pray." This was what Zhongchen told the ambassador who was kneeling on the ground. If the emperor recognized the situation and willingly joined under NAC's banner, it was not a big deal for him to continue to be the emperor. Although he would not receive the treatment of being above all, he could easily live the rest of his life in peace and comfort. Unfortunately, the elders and the emperor were enraged by NAC General's arrogant attitude. "These rats, how dare they!" Smashing his cup on the ground, the emperor cursed out. "Emperor, please remain calm. As long as we mobilize the army of Empire, we will definitely be able to defeat the external bandits." "That NAC general is way too arrogant. Does he really think Empire doesn't have people?" "But Federation's army is still across the river." People who understood reminded in a feeble voice. With these words, the enraged elders instantly deflated and couldn't say a word more. That's right. The threat Empire faced not only came from the east, but it also came from Federation. West of Gang River, with the loss of Guru tribe, Empire was already at a disadvantage against Federation. Now they faced the threat of the NAC. The petrifying firepower advantage was hard for anyone to gain the courage to resist. Emperor on the dragon chair was silent while he watched the elders gravely. These useless things were witty when discussing how to spend the money in the treasury. They all had a flawless accounting book, and they were all peerless when it came to conspiracy. But in this critical moment, they couldn't be lousier. Speaking of which, where did Chen Lin go? An elder suddenly spoke up. The palace suddenly became rowdy again. That's right. Where did that fool go? Why didn't we see him? Capture him. If it were not for that Dumba's idea, our two divisions should be fighting against NAC at the front line rather than being forced to Donggang Plantation. Right. Without being about to think of a solution to solve the difficult problem at hand, the elders put their attention into finding the scapegoat. Even if it served no purpose in resurrecting Empire from the losing situation, it was the only thing they could do and can do. When the Emperor heard the words of the elders, he began to realize what they said is true. If it were not for Chen Lin's recommendation to use the slaves to comfort Guru tribe, how would the situation evolve to this state? He didn't come today because he realized his crime. Emperor looked at the guard beside him with a gloomy expression. "My order, arrest Elder Chen Lin, and demote his wife and daughter to slaves." "Yes." The guard nodded and walked away. Just then, a familiar voice came from the door. "No need for the trouble. I'm here." Elder Chen stood tall at the door. Beside him was a figure familiar to everyone at the scene. Commander of Empire's 3rd Division, Wei Biao. Chapter 643, A New Owner of Capital. The atmosphere in the palace cooled to freezing point. The instant Chen Lin's big belly appeared at the door, disbelief froze on all the elders' faces. "Wei Biao, what are you doing here?" The emperor frowned and asked with a cold voice. "Emperor, you still don't understand? I thought Emperor is smarter than this." Chen Lin's pair of small eyes glanced over the elders and finally stopped on the emperor's face. How many years has it been? He was excluded from the center of power in Empire. No matter how many terms, the abducted crown was far away from his grasp. But today, The influential elders all looked at him with fear. Emperor stared right into Wei Biao's eyes and ordered, "Arrest him." The commander, previously loyal to Empire, didn't move. His reaction validated the Emperor's suspicion. Third Empire stationed in the capital committed treason. The brave division was the proudness of Empire before, but the Emperor never would have thought that the commander he personally appointed would stand here. The Emperor's throat felt dry, but he still squeezed out a word. "Why, we can't win." Wei Biao's response was brief. As a previous pack soldier, his grasp on the battle was more superior than anyone in the palace. When he saw the missile hailstorm, he realized that it was an uneven war from the start. The only chance of winning was to launch an attack against Nak's outpost when Nak was unleashing its firepower on Guru tribe. But the smokes of the uprising sealed the fate of Empire. The slaves at Donggang Plantation became insurgents to force the two divisions at the front line to retreat. Federation took the opportunity to line troops west of Gang River to hinder the movement of Empire's 1st Division. Empire lost the opportunity to attack the Nak outpost. When Nak's missiles were resupplied and the bomb in the electromagnetic pulse cannon was reloaded, Nak with an absolute firepower advantage meant that 3rd Division stationed in the capital was only awaiting their death. If they wanted, cleansing the entire capital will only require 1,000 combustion missiles. Wei Biao trusts that they had the ammunition. Just because of this, the Emperor squeezed the words out. Difficulty. Wei Biao didn't look at the Emperor in the eyes. He lowered his head. "Emperor, please step down." "What if I say no?" The Emperor narrowed his eyes and signaled the guards beside him. "Sorry, I just want to live with my brothers." Wei Biao raised his head and put his hand on his waist. The pupils of the Emperor instantly contracted. Behind Wei Biao, the fierce soldiers with rifles stepped into the palace. The gunshots lasted 10 minutes. Blood soaked the carpet of the palace. The guards and soldiers engaged in intense crossfire, but the ending was evident. The difference in number could not be made up by shooting. When the shooting stopped, the elders all died under the fire of the 3rd Division soldiers. The Emperor on the dragon chair looked at everything in front of his eyes blankly without being able to say a word. Wei Biao wanted to keep the Emperor's life, but Chen Lin took out the pistol hidden in his pocket and personally killed the poor elder on the dragon chair. Seeing the Emperor had already died, while Wei Biao was displeased, he had to let it go. The 3rd Division quarantined the palace. The death of the Emperor didn't cause a ripple in the Empire on the brink of collapse. When the news was controlled, Chen Lin immediately came to find Zhao Badong to deliver the message of surrender to Nak. After an hour, when the Nak airship arrived above the capital, the residents of the capital just realized the sky just changed. "Is this the capital?" On the drop pod of order, Zhang Chen observed the arena just 10 square kilometers in size from above. Inside the arena was filled with concrete structures and crude tents, narrow paths mixed among the buildings. "That's right, this is their capital." Beside Zhang Chen was Zhao Chenwu, looking at the palace from the top. His voice carried a hint of mockery. The drop pod was lowered by graphene cables. Bathing in the fearful sights from the square, Zhang Chen along with 10 soldiers in power armor stepped into the middle of Capital Square. Empire's 3rd Division already dropped their weapon and first surrendered to the Nak force. 11 survivor locations of Empire were categorized as Nak's economic zone, governed by an elected government and supervised by an accent director responsible for the defense of the location. When Chen Lin waiting on the square saw Zhang Chen, he immediately came to greet him with a complimental smile. "I'm Chen Lin. I've been awaiting Mr. General's arrival." Zhang Chen examined the last elder of Empire before he focused his attention on the man behind him. "I heard you were a pack soldier." "That's already history." Zhang Chen noticed when Wei Biao said this, he used history instead of past. Without saying more to him, Zhang Chen then glanced over to Zhao Badong with his chest raised high. He nodded, pleased. "Excellent, you did great this time." "It is due to General's mentoring," Zhao Badong replied, his face flushed. To receive such a grand compliment, he will definitely be promoted. While excited, Zhao Badong used the opportunity to suck up. "That's enough. No need to suck up to me. If you have nothing to report, Go stay for a bit on the airship, you will be rewarded along with the soldiers. Thank you, General. Zhao Badong was ecstatic. Being left hanging by Zhang Chen, Chen Lin began to feel anxious. When Zhao Badong came to find him, he promised that if he did as told under Nak's directions, when they conquered Empire's capital, he would be guaranteed wealth and glory. Now that the capital was part of Nak's territory, and when it was time for Nak to fulfill the promise, Chen Lin became unsettled again. Just as Chen Lin was hesitating if he should remind Zhang Chen not to forget about him, Zhang Chen looked at him with an ambiguous smile on his face. Looks like you're the last elder of Empire, General, you're being funny. Chen Lin's back was bent and he awkwardly laughed. Empire is already kneeling in front of you, there is no more elder. To the flattering attitude of the elder, Zhang Chen grinned and said, there definitely should still be elders, but from now on, you're working for me, General. The other elders are all dead, Chen Lin carefully said. Dead? Zhang Chen paused and looked over to Wei Biao. Dead due to resistance, Wei Biao briefly answered. Chapter 644. The officials, all dead? It certainly surprised Zhang Chen. He originally wanted to select a few elders that forsake darkness for light to let them organize the affairs of this arena for him, but they all died. Zhang Chen looked at Chen Lin with a deeper layer of meaning in his eyes. The ambiguous smile made Chen Lin afraid to look him in the eyes. Mr. Chen is decisive, nice tactic. With a drop of cold sweat rolling down from his forehead, Chen Lin replied while stuttering, no, that's enough, whatever. Zhang Chen waved his hand to dismiss the topic. Chen Lin finally felt relieved when he heard Zhang Chen say this. It was his petty idea to kill the elders and emperor. Only when the officials of Empire died could his importance stand out. His only worry was Zhang Chen would have an opinion with what he did, but now it looked like while the Nak general certainly saw through his wit, he didn't mind. Zhang Chen thought for a moment and nonchalantly asked, what's the population of the capital? Permanent population 43,510. Transient population roughly 3,000. Chen Lin immediately answered. What's the financial surplus of last month? 90,000 crystals. You know the situation of Empire quite well. You didn't just guess that, did you? Zhang Chen glanced at him feeling surprised. Chen Lin grinned. He used a flattering voice to say, how do I dare to trick you? Perfect, looks like you're not useless. Zhang Chen nodded. Then, are you interested working for me? Chen Lin was ecstatic when he heard this. Without regard to what other people thought, he immediately kneeled down. Don't be too happy yet. Zhang Chen didn't make him get up and instead, with a smile, he looked at him. I know your little wit and stuff. You should know, if you use that wit where you shouldn't use it, what kind of consequences you will have. Zhang Chen immediately put his head on the ground to express his allegiance. If I dare to have any other thoughts, I'm willing to die by being stabbed 1,000 times. Remember what you said. Get up. Thank you, General. While the morality of Chen Lin was still to be determined, he had talent in management. Zhang Chen sent people to verify the residence and treasury. The data was no different than what he said. As long as he kept him on a leash, it was fine to use this kind of person. It was not selecting a role model. From the way of the square to the palace, Chen Lin fully developed his sucking up nature and followed behind Zhang Chen. But Zhang Chen was uninterested in his flattering words and suck up. He only briefly asked about the situation in Empire before getting this guy to shut up. With one foot stepping into the palace, the officials of Empire already packed the palace. Looking at the compliant officials, Zhang Chen furrowed his brows, titled his head, and asked Chen Lin, how many people are officials in Empire? General. There are 5 ranks of officials with 5 divisions in each rank for a total of 527 officials. What the fuck? That many? Zhang Chen estimated that around 1 out of 100 people in the capital was an official. This didn't include the officials with less important roles. The massive government system of Empire was something that gave the elders a headache for the longest time, but these people more or less were related to the elders. With such a small community, no one wanted to mention cutting people. Therefore, the officials of Empire increased more and more, A lot of times one thing was separated into 5 things for 10 people to do. There are too many people, lay some off. Jiang Chen dismissed what he said and said in an annoyed tone. Different from Chen Lin's cautiousness, Jiang Chen didn't control his voice at all. Because of this, when the officials in the palace heard what he said, their expressions all froze with displeasure written all over their faces. Chen Lin had a bitter smile in his mind, but Jiang Chen didn't care about what they thought and stepped to the seat in the front of the palace. He sat on the dragon chair, getting a slight feeling of what it was like to be an emperor. Then he spoke to the officials. Is there anyone displeased with me sitting here? No SHT. Who dares to say they are displeased? The officials were all compliant with their head lowered, not saying a word. However, they had the most vicious curses in their minds. Great. Looks like no one is displeased. Jiang Chen leaned into the chair and examined the officials with his eyes narrowed. The Emperor of Empire did know how to enjoy. The dragon chair was much more comfortable than the wooden chair in his office. Above the officials, the taste of power was indeed intoxicating. Jiang Chen cleared his throat and said, Chen Lin, give me the officials' list. Chen Lin walked out and handed him a tablet courteously. While Empire lacked in technological development, it managed to achieve digital documentation. All the names and rankings of officials were recorded on the server in the palace responsible by people with management access. Typically, it was the emperor, but if the emperor died, it passed on to the elder. Since the emperor already died, Chen Lin was the only elder left. The management access for the server data naturally passed into Chen Lin's hand. Now that Jiang Chen wanted it, Chen Lin handed to him with both hands. Jiang Chen took over, saw that the list was already on the screen, and began to flip through them. Yang Liang, here. An older-looking official stepped out and bowed to Jiang Chen. You're responsible for the gate tax, right? Yes. Yang Liang said compliantly. There will be no more gate tax at Kingshan Arena. You can go home. With the sound of knees hitting the ground, the older Yang Liang kneeled on the ground with tears bursting out. Emperor. Managing the gate tax was a lucrative duty. There were at least thousands of people that entered in and out of the gate, and everyone who came in must pay. While 2 crystals were not a lot, it was at least 2 to 3,000 crystals in the bag per day. No one would notice if he pocketed 100 crystals. Jiang Chen's decision killed his money-making method. Don't call me emperor, call me general. Jiang Chen said while annoyed. He was too lazy to listen to his complaint. He swiped his finger and called the next name, Lu Guangyuan. Here. Lu Guangyuan anxiously stepped out and gulped while waiting for Jiang Chen's decision. Markets Stimulation Department. What department is this? Stabilizing price, promote economic development, improve. Then what's the pricing council? Wang Qianping. Why don't you explain it to me? Here, I'm here. Wang Qianping stepped out with cold sweat dripping down. Jiang Chen eyed him, signaling him to talk. Stabilizing price, promote economic development, coordinate, what's the damn difference? Jiang Chen was growing increasingly flustered. General, if you listen carefully, the last word is different. Wang Qianping's small eyes stared at the floor as he anxiously replied. Without wasting his word, Jiang Chen swiped 2 times on the screen. The 2 departments are abolished. The tax rate will be determined by the new administrative department after accessing market supply and demand. You can go home now. With 2 sounds of kneecaps hitting the ground, Lu Guangyuan and Wang Qianping both dropped down with tearless grief. If the gate tax was a juicy piece of meat, the 2 departments were a giant pig with countless juicy meat. Now that they were being removed, how were they willing to just let it go? General, you can't just do that to us. No. Jiang Chen was getting goosebumps. The tablet in his hand almost dropped to the ground. You guys are disgusting. People on the outside who don't know what's going on probably think I did something to them. Holding on to the tablet, Jiang Chen gave the 2 people a hard stare before eyeing the kinetic skeleton soldiers beside him. Take them out. With the officials anxiously watching, the 3 officials on the ground were forcibly dragged out by the soldiers. Displeased? Anyone will be displeased. The cake being taken away was pure robbery for these people. But with a black muzzle in front of their heads, No one dared to say number. Chapter 645. Useless. The officials below him were petrified, afraid Jiang Chen would call their name. But what must come will eventually come. After half an hour, more than half of the 500-something officials were cut, only leaving a scattered 100 to 200 people. The massive layoff was unseen of. Even a public company in an economic recession didn't lay off more than 70% of its employees. Jiang Chen didn't care. He abolished all departments he thought were unnecessary. NAC had money, but no obligation to feed useless people. The people left behind all let out a breath of relief. A lot people didn't realize they were completely drenched in sweat. Departments with odd names were all cut. Departments with repetitive functions were merged. And the remaining 117 officials were temporarily put on leave while they waited for NAC's Minister of Administration's arrangement. The name capital was removed and replaced by Qingshan Arena Survivor Camp, referred to as Qingshan Town. While a lot of officials didn't want to change the name, the survivors had no problem with it. From their conversations, no one thought of this place as the capital. Instead they referred to it as Arena. Chen Lin assisted in the accession to the throne and was named superintendent of Qiangshan, responsible for its affairs, and was supervised by NAC director. Jiang Chen already decided on the director. The captain of the Power Armor Airdrop Platoon, Kai Zhuan. He first pierced into the enemy zone of control during the attack on Guru Tribe, and assisted the infantries in breaking through the line of defense to achieve an outstanding accomplishment. After Jiang Chen asked for his personal opinion, he named him the director of Hukong Survival Camp. It was not the most attractive option for a NAC upper-class citizen and knight to work far away from Wanghai. Not only would the quality of life decrease by a wide margin, the administrative rank was also 2 levels lower compared to Chunan at the 6th Street and Yulu of Camp 027. But after the completion of his term, once he requested for return to Wanghai, the director of a colony on his resume would indeed help him go further in his career. The surrendered Empire's 3rd Division was renamed to Militia Division with the size shrinking from 5,000 to 3,000. The homemade rifles were all thrown into the warehouse and replaced with the Reaper assault rifle produced in the 6th Street. The leather and steel boards sealed together were thrown out and changed into carbon nano-bulletproof vest produced by the Fishbone base. Other than that, 100 trainers from Wanghai were incorporated into the division to strengthen NAC's control of the militia while at the same time increase the competency level of the force. After a series of adjustments, the lousy force instantly gained some traces of an elite force. The primary responsibilities of the militia were to maintain the security of the location, maintain NAC's defense in Hukong-controlled area, and become a reserved force of NAC's 3 major divisions. The previous division commander Wei Biao maintained his position, while only the division was changed from an army to a militia. Qin Wei was shocked to discover Jiang Chen preserved his position. He previously thought his fate was at most to be given a severance package and take a few of his confidants back home to farm. But Jiang Chen allowed him to keep his position and increased his salary by 2-folds. While there were NAC officials mixed into the division now, it was reasonable since absolute trust was non-existent. Other than loyalty, he didn't say much more. The reason for preserving Wei Biao's position was because of a deeper level of consideration from Jiang Chen. One was to set an example for the 3 commanders outside of Qingshan Arena. One was because he viewed highly of Wei Biao's ability, former Pakland Force soldier. While the title was not as convincing as Brigade Commander Han Junhua, he at least received military training from before the war. Compared with the former civilian survivors, his combat ability and strategic awareness was far stronger. The commander of the division was only training. If he proved his ability, he will be promoted in a matter of time. As to loyalty, other than the balance of power, slavery chips exists in Wanghai. After slicing the cake of the old regime into pieces, Jiang Chen threw the tablet back to Zhang Lin before he strolled out of the palace while the officials looked as if the plaque had gone away. The political change in the arena didn't cause any influence on the people. When they were sure NAC would not take away their crystals, The merchants and mercenaries there continued on. The only change was that no more green-skinned figures were seen on the street. The violent maniacs were wiped out by soldiers with kinetic skeletons when Nak first occupied the arena. They were killed on the street, drowned in the toilet. The difference between mutated humans and humans was great. Nak's soldiers' shooting skill was also superb. There could be no error. The bloody genocide caused resistance from the mutated humans, which caused innocent civilians to be hurt. A lot of civilians, mercenaries, hunters with weapons all joined the mission to wipe out the mutated humans. Quite a few of them were oppressed. However, because of the protection policy under Empire, they had to swallow their rage. The moment Empire collapsed, Nak announced that mutated humans were the same as mutants. They started their vengeance. Sacrifices did occur, but people expressed their full support. Perhaps people in modern world would be compassionate to the mutated human that suffered a tragic fate, but these people would never exist in the apocalypse unless they were the blue skin that just walked out of a fallout shelter and yet to experience the world. After taking care of the affairs in the palace, Jiang Chen took Sun Ziru waiting at the gate to visit the clinic in the ghetto Zhao Badong mentioned. There was no one in the waiting room. It looked like the shadow of order affected the clinic's business. Jiang Chen got a number from the metallic ball robot at the door. He only waited for 2 minutes before he walked into the room with Sun Ziru and saw the fabled Dr. Sunday. With a buzz cut, he looked clean with 20 years of age. He didn't look like he spent 20 years in the fallout shelter. Dr. Sun put down the notebook in his hand and gazed at the two at the door. "Are you here for a diagnosis?" Jiang Chen shook his head and gently said, "For the secret of immortality." "You are Jiang Chen?" "Yes." Jiang Chen nodded. Dr. Sun nodded. Without saying anything, he moved his sight to Sun Ziru, who was leaning by the door with a hint of reminiscence on his face. "How many years has it been? You've grown so much." "You know me?" Sun Ziru tilted her head and looked back at him with confusion. "When you were this big, I hugged you before." Dr. Sun smiled. He used his hands to measure a size of a baby. "If I remember correct, your name should be Sun Zhao?" Chapter 646. I hesitated. "That's my sister." Sun Ziru shook her head with a smile. "Although we do look alike." Dr. Sun paused for a second before a smile appeared on his face. "Oh, I do apologize." "It's okay." Sun Ziru shook her head. Her eyebrows had a hint of reminiscence present. "People often mixed up the two of us when we were young, even when we're not twins. Let me introduce myself. I'm Sun Boy." Dr. Sun extended his right hand to Jiang Chen. Jiang Chen shook his hand, looked at him and also briefly reintroduced himself. "Jiang Chen, the Nak General." Dr. Sun gave Jiang Chen a friendly smile before he continued. "Because we share the same last name, my memory of that little girl is quite vivid. Since her younger sister is here, you should know her sister, right?" "MHMM." Jiang Chen nodded. "She was the first person he met in this world." Sun Ziru put a finger on her chin and asked the question troubling her mind. "But even if you saw my sister, she was just a baby. You shouldn't have seen her as an adult, right? So how could you have mistaken me for my sister?" Dr. Sun smiled. "There was a flood of babies in the fallout shelter. Due to the lack of doctors, I was the doctor who completed the procedure. With the help of DNA replication technology, before you were all born, we already knew what you would look like in the future. But unfortunately, I didn't get to see you grow up." Sun Ziru nodded. Jiang Chen took out a diary from his pocket and placed it on the table. "Did you place the diary on the table of the director's office?" "The diary was there from the beginning. I just moved his body back where he was supposed to be." Sun Baoi must have been referring to the deceased fallout shelter director. "There are a few pages ripped out from the diary." Pages from the diary were already ripped out from the beginning by its owner. "Of course. I think you wouldn't be too interested in Fallout Shelter 071's past." "On the contrary," Jiang Chen shook his head, "if it's convenient for you, I hope you can tell me what happened afterward, including the history of Fallout Shelter 071, as well as the Observer. The experiments you conducted." "The Observer?" "You know this word." Melancholy surfaced on Sun Baoi's face. "Even I almost forgot." He paused, looked at Jiang Chen, and invited him to sit down. Feel free to sit. This story is quite long. When I woke up from the hibernation chamber, it was already the 10th year. 8 years prior, the director ordered security to attack my lab and made all my efforts go down the drain. He also stole the golden apple. He didn't kill me, but instead, he said, once the fallout shelter opens, people will punish you for your crimes. He shut me into the hibernation chamber. His arrogance made me uncomfortable. It wasn't because the punishment would never arrive, but it was because of the unrealistic fantasy he had of the outside world. With this fantasy, his naivety would inevitably kill everyone in the fallout shelter, much more than the people I killed, and it would be for an extremely boring reason. I sat in the chair trembling while blankly staring at the propaganda poster in the fallout shelter. I tried to empty my mind in order to get accustomed to the unnatural time difference. 8 years. It was just like a dream. My eyes closed, eyes opened, and everything outside the glass window was covered in thick dust. Time muddied everything, but it didn't muddy me in the mirror. The golden apple was destroyed. The arrogant Mr. Director destroyed it after he pressed the button to start the hibernation chamber. Regardless, my mission ended. When I stepped over the security line, just like I expected, everything here was abandoned. When I stepped through the metal door, just like I expected, everything outside was destroyed in the nuclear war. The ending could have been foreseen, but most people always maintained an unrealistic fantasy before finally drowning in their dreams. Someone said a long time ago that only 2 nuclear bombs were needed to destroy the world, the first being fear, and the second being vengeance. I don't remember his name anymore, but I'm certain about one thing. He was elevated from a sociologist to a prophet. There were a few metal shacks on the surface. I remember those things. They were strategic reserves in the fallout shelter. The PAC flag burnt to dust fitted satirically well with the propaganda posters on the train. Once the door opened, the survivors would have to rely on those tools to rebuild their home in the ruins. But from the bones and bullet marks, I already guessed their fate. How could trained forces lose to refugees with primitive weapons? My guess was that they didn't die because of the forces' shooting skills. It must have been due to comical humanitarianism as well as courtesies extended by the civilized. I dug through the shelves in the ruins to search for anything useful. A pistol, a picture belonging to God knows who, and a diary with many pages ripped out. They were all the supplies I could gather. I considered going back to sleep. 10 years was too short. If I time traveled to 1,000 years later, the situation would probably be much better, whether it was just a barren field outside or a city built by the new humans. If it was the former, I could use the human clone technology in the other fallout shelters to restart the PAC civilization. If it was the latter, museums created by new humans could provide with a well-paying job to teach elementary students participating in social awareness activities about how the people before the war lived, how they tarnished themselves. Regardless of the choice I made, there were urgent matters I had to take care of first. There was no power and no food. I had to find useful things among the ruins. I had to at least gather enough nuclear fusion cores needed for the hibernation chamber and a few nutrient supplies. Before I searched for other survivors, I had to replace the blue skin I was wearing. If all the newbies who just left their nest wore similar clothes, I had enough reason to believe this blue skin would bring me trouble. Just like how a civilization naturally attracted barbarians, it took me quite a while to find well-fitting clothes. Finally, I chose a suit whose color was fading and wore a bulletproof vest inside. Along the highway, I walked all the way into the city. Zombies, mutants, raiders, mutated humans, and cannibals. There was danger everywhere, but I only had 14 bullets. 2 clips. Hospitals, schools, automated factories. All these places could have nuclear fusion cores, but they had all been rummaged by scavengers. There were survivor gathering spots where human activity could be seen, but out of safety considerations, I didn't dare to approach them. Since this was the apocalypse, later on, I incidentally saved a merchant from zombies and used the crystals I had to trade for some useful items. He took me to Zong City and told me that as long as I had crystals, I could buy anything there, whether it was men or women. If it didn't exist on the market, I could just go to the bar. After reaching out to survivors, my life became a lot easier. When I knew they lacked doctors here, I opened a clinic to treat patients in exchange for crystals. Then with those crystals, I placed orders for nuclear fusion cores at the bar. A lot of things happened in that year, but I managed to collect 10 nuclear fusion cores. The nuclear fusion core batteries were highly efficient. If they were just used to maintain the hibernation chamber, one would be enough to last me 100 years of sleep. I closed the clinic and refused the president's, parliament members, and friends' invitations to stay. I returned to Fallout Shelter 071, but the second before I laid in the hibernation chamber, I hesitated. Chapter 647, The Secret to Immortality. Why? When Zhang Chen heard that, he was eager to know. It's the nature of humans as creatures. The more interaction they have with other humans, the harder it is to accept loneliness. Sun Bei sighed. No matter how you decipher human nature, no matter how indifferent you are, it's not something you, as a 20-year-old, can understand. Zhang Chen looked at him with questions still in his eyes while Zhang Chen waited for him to continue. In the story, I mentioned that I saved a merchant. Yes. Zhang Chen nodded. We later became friends, and he invested in this clinic. Sun Bei paused for a moment and let out a sigh. Not only him, but also the crippled hunter, the merchant from the Northern Alliance area, the female gunslinger from the Blackstreet Bar. I remember their names, even if some of them may have already died or left for places afar. Regardless, my memories are still there. The more people you know, the more you can't let them go. I admit everything is terrible, but it's not despairing to the point where you don't have the will to live. Is that just because of the relationships you have? Don't describe it so simply. Sun Bei shrugged. If you had to lay in the hibernation chamber for 1,000 years, would you be willing to let everything go here and head for a different future alone? When Zhang Chen thought about Sun Zhao, Yao Yao, and the people loyal to him, he shook his head. I kind of understand now. Sun Bei nodded. Although I decided to stay in this era, I didn't immediately leave the Fallout Shelter. Instead, I used the only quantum computer left and restarted the experiment again. What about the samples? Since your experiment, the samples. Those people were all killed. I'm the sample. Sun Bei looked at Zhang Chen, took out a small bottle from his pocket, and placed it on the table. This is the secret to immortality. Zhang Chen's eyes locked onto the thumb-sized bottle. A crimson liquid was inside. This is... You've heard about hidden genetic codes before, right? Zhang Chen nodded. This is a hidden DNA code expressed in a special manner after the injection of a genetic vaccine. A lot of mercenaries and soldiers take it to increase their combat abilities. Take a guess. If you unlock it to the third level, the last level, what would happen? Without giving Zhang Chen time to think, he tapped the small bottle with his finger gently. You will become a god. Because of his stern expression, Zhang Chen held his breath before letting the words out. Difficulty. That is absurd. But then, Zhang Chen suddenly recalled the man who referred to himself as God. If you think that's absurd, it depends on your definition of God, Sun Bei said emotionlessly. Although it's comical to define God through science, we still gave God a crude meaning. A being who can do things humans can't do is hence referred to as God. For example, the leader of the Dusk Church could use spiritual energy to explode 100 blood crystals to trigger an explosion that could wipe out an entire province from the map. Absorbing energy from crystals is as easy as drinking water. Zhang Chen asked Sun Ziru before. With her second-level genetic code ability, she couldn't even explode one blood crystal, let alone hundreds of them. Of course, the definition of God wasn't only limited to destructive power. So you mean? Zhang Chen looked into Dr. Sun's eyes. He had an idea of what Dr. Sun meant. Looks like you guessed it. Yes, we researched the side effects of genetic vaccines before the war. Based on the genetic map, we concluded that once the genetic code resilience evolved to level 3, the immortality ability could be unlocked. Sun Bei paused briefly, then continued. With current technological capabilities, The abilities in the genetic code can be transplanted. The only material required is 100 milligrams of serum. From one perspective, immortality was something only reachable by a god. But more surprisingly, this ability only reachable by a god could be transplanted surgically. Jiang Chen looked at the bottle on the table and fell into deep thought. Therefore, the girl mentioned in the diary should be Sun Zhao. She should have been just half a year old, and the other samples in Fallout Shelter 071 should be normal people with the genetic code resilience. Jiang Chen had an idea of the kind of experiment Dr. Sun performed that caused all the samples to die. Sun Zhao told him before, in order to increase the effect of the genetic vaccine and unlock the next level of genetic code, aside from going through high-intensity training, the fastest and least technical way would be to seek your own death. It was only when you teetered between the edge of life and death that the hidden genetic code could be exposed. The simplest way would be to throw the group of people into an arena to fight, and the people who survived to the end would have the highest probability of reaching the god boundary. When Jiang Chen thought this through, the benevolent smile on Dr. Sun's face gave him a petrifying chill. To be able to perform the experiment on the people he lived with, this guy isn't human at all. Sun Baiyi read the repulsion in Jiang Chen's eyes and he had a smug expression. It's an inhumane experiment, right? Is it not? I'm delighted you think this way. If people who shouldn't control the secret to immortality got control of the secret, that would be a disaster to civilization. Is that really what you think? Jiang Chen was puzzled. From his own memoirs and the diary of the director, if the alignment chart, 1, was used to describe his personality, Jiang Chen could absolutely define him as an absolute neutral. He discarded all the weaknesses in human nature and viewed selfishness and apathy as natural. His contribution was just not proactively being evil. But his reaction after he left the Fallout Shelter the second time was completely different. Jiang Chen thought he belonged to neutral order now. Sun Baiyi didn't directly answer Jiang Chen. Instead, he said gently, human nature is a burden to survival, but without this burden, the seed of civilization will not germinate. I feel like I've heard this before. I guess he's another observer. Sun Baiyi laughed. Jiang Chen nodded and brought the tropic back to the genetic code. Did you unlock the third level? Sun Baiyi shook his head. How's that possible? Then how did you not age at all in the past 10 years? Jiang Chen was confused. Did you remember the explanation for resilience in the EP? Jiang Chen tried to recollect his memory of when they returned from the sewers and Sun Zhao explained Jiang Chen's abilities, expending life in exchange for healing non-critical wounds in a short period of time. That's right. Sun Baiyi nodded, pleased. When evolved to the second level, new abilities will be unlocked. Revival? That's not the right word. Sun Baiyi waved his finger in disagreement. Aside from fixing damaged organs, the ability also fixes DNA telomeres. From a macro perspective, it greatly increases your vitality. Therefore, that's right, I'm only at the second level. But even with just level 2 unlocked, I gained around 500 years in life. As long as I don't repetitively use resilience and revive. Sun Baiyi shrugged. With the second level, all I can give you as the key, as long as you transplant resilience into your body, you'll have a chance of gaining immortality. A chance? That's right. Sun Baiyi nodded. You can only gain the key from another person. As for how many doors you can open, that's up to yourself. Jiang Chen looked at Sun Ziru. From her expression, he received an affirmative reply. After he hesitated for a moment, Jiang Chen asked, if the genetic code is changed to resilience, what would happen to the previous ability? To be honest, he was unwilling to give up Fury and Invictus, 2 combat abilities that almost allowed him to cheat. Sun Baiyi woke him up from his greedy fantasy with laughter. Since it replaces, the previous ability will disappear. I finally unlocked level 2. Jiang Chen's smile was mixed with bitterness. I found a shortcut to unlock the second level for resilience. You don't have to worry about that. Is that so? If you want to replace the genetic code in your body, I can do the operation for you. Sun Baiyi pushed the bottle beside Jiang Chen gently. Of course, if you don't trust me, You can take the technology and perform the operation with other doctors. Zhang Chen played with the serum in his hand and abruptly asked, "Can I ask a final question? If I evolve Fury to the 3rd level, what ability would I obtain?" Fury. The frequency of this genetic code is high, but people rarely evolve it to the 2nd level, let alone the 3rd level. I see that you must have evolved it to the 2nd level? Sun Beiyue was quite intrigued. Yes, because there's no precedent. I can't predict what ability you will have. But I'm certain it must be an ability that approaches the territory of God, Sun Beiyue said with certainty. Should I change my ability? Zhang Chen stared at the 100 milligrams of serum and fell into silence. 1. Alignment chart, the meme that include Choetic evil, absolute neutral. And 7 other states. Chapter 648, Not Knowing One's Own Strength. With the bottle of serum and information related to the surgery, Zhang Chen left the clinic. Based on what Dr. Sun said, the surgery could be done before 50 years of age. Through a special method, it would only require 1 to 2 years to evolve resilience into revive. He is only 20-something, so there is no need to make a rash decision. Do we not need to control Dr. Sun? When leaving the ghetto, Sun Ziru turned her head and asked Zhang Chen, "Get someone to keep an eye on him." "It doesn't seem necessary to control him," Zhang Chen said. At the end of their conversation, Zhang Chen invited him to the Fishbone base to serve as a doctor, but he rejected the offer. He wanted to continue staying there, living on the wasteland under the identity of Dr. Sun and treating the unfortunate. But at the same time, he expressed that once everyone around him turned old and the children turned into adults, he would consider closing the clinic and quietly leaving the place. By the time, he would consider entering the hibernation chamber to wait for a distant future. When they passed an alley, the two walked toward the exit of the ghetto. But just then, a few figures walked out from the dark and surrounded them. Zhang Chen stopped and looked at the group of people blocking them, intrigued. They were holding guns, knives and even sticks. He could clearly sense the unfriendliness in their eyes. "There are actually people unafraid of death?" Zhang Chen narrowed his eyes and said pleasantly, "You are?" The man leading the group with a bald head didn't respond. A teen with a rifle walked up 2 steps and thuggishly said, "Buddy, you ruined the jobs of many after you came to capital. You think you're tough? Ruined the jobs?" Zhang Chen instantly understood what this was about. He said while pondering, "So, an official who was cut sent you guys here?" Another thug with a scimitar tilted his head to crack his joints. He looked at Zhang Chen with vicious mockery. "You certainly are brave to come here without a guard, and you brought a girl along too. Don't you know this is the ghetto?" "Of course I know this is the ghetto, but did I need to bring guards?" Zhang Chen laughed. The thugs all stared at him as if he was dumb. They looked at each other before they started to chuckle. "Enough. No more bullshit. Someone bought your life. Sorry. Haha, we'll take care of the little hottie beside you." The bald-headed man laughed menacingly. His small eyes squinted into a line and he wantonly checked Sun Ziru out. "I'm not little at all, although I'm a bit smaller than sister." Sun Ziru blinked at Zhang Chen without any sense of urgency before she turned around to grin at the bald-headed man who just disrespected her. Her voice gradually turned cold as she said, "Considering what you just said, that's enough for you to die twice." "Huh, with just you?" The teen sneered, lowered the rifle on his shoulder, and pointed at Sun Ziru while he arrogantly said, "I want to see you." Zhang Chen didn't want to watch their hideous gestures, so a cold voice came out of his lips. "Fire!" Bang! A gust of wind sent dust high up into the air. Once the dust settled down, only the bullet marks on the ground and the hint of blood in the air proved the thugs had been there. As the general, Zhang Chen obviously wouldn't have walked into dangerous territory without protection. Under the airship's watch, he didn't think they would be in danger there. Zhang Chen turned around to look at the peasants trembling in darkness and met their fearful gazes. They probably knew the thugs had been hiding there already. No one had told the two of them, but the peasants just remained in the dark. It didn't take too much thinking to know they want to scavenge the bodies. Jiang Chen suddenly thought the frail and dark faces looked like crows watching atop tree branches. Just leave these things for me to deal with. Now there's blood splattered all over my dress. Sun Ziru, who had dust on her face, turned around, picked up her dress hem stained with blood and rolled her eyes at Jiang Chen, displeased. "It's okay, I'll change for you when we get back," Jiang Chen whispered into her ear with a smirk. Ziru's face quickly turned red. "Screw you." The two disappeared in the alley. Like crows that sensed carrion, the people hidden in the darkness swarmed the lumps of bullet holes mixed with chunks of flesh and began searching for anything valuable. When they returned to the airship, Jiang Chen took Sun Ziru to change into a clean set of clothes. Then he called upon Kai Zhuan, who was acting as the director. He ordered all officials who had been dismissed to be imprisoned and investigated. If they had any connections related to the attack in the alley, they were to be executed. After taking care of that matter, Jiang Chen headed to the command room of the airship and discussed next steps with Han Junhua. 1st Division surrendered to Federation, and the soldiers of Federation already crossed the Gang River Bridge and are building defense bunkers now. From the images collected by drones, they're equipped with anti-air cannons and missiles as well as heavy artillery support. Just like that, they're focusing on establishing an elite force. Jiang Chen nodded. What about the other divisions of Empire? 2nd Division ceased its attacks on Donggang Plantation and fled north with signs indicating they're moving to Wu City. 4th Division stopped its suppression of the insurgents and is in the process of negotiations for surrender. What do they want? Jiang Chen asked. Division Commander Li Haing agreed to surrender to us, but he hopes he can continue to act as the commander. Accept his terms. With a brief pause, he continued, once he surrenders, reduce the size of the force by half, retrain the force, establish the 2nd Militia, and make them responsible for the defense of Golden River Farm. Okay. Right now, Deputy Captain Wang Zhou walked into the command room and made a report to Jiang Chen. Federation sent an ambassador with the hopes of discussing the distribution of Hukan. The ambassador from Federation? When Jiang Chen thought about Federation taking advantage of the situation, a mysterious smile appeared on his face. Make them wait in the conference room beside the palace. I'll personally go to see them. Yes. Wang Zhou saluted. Right. Move the airship to Golden River Farm. It's unsafe to be so close to Federation's air defense power, and it's also not necessary either, Jiang Chen said. Orders long-range fire coverage could easily cover the entire Hukan territory, even areas hundreds of kilometers away. If they weren't showing off their power, there was no need to be so close. When he left the room, he called Ji Yukan, who was currently resting at Golden River Farm, and gave him some orders. Come to the arena now. Ji Yukan was shocked. No SHT. Could I ask what it's about? Yukan whispered. Good things, Jiang Chen answered with irritation. If you want to become the president of Federation, then stop wasting my time and come. I'll arrange people to pick you up, so wait at the gate of the farm. Yes. Yes. Ji Yukan was ecstatic. He immediately darted out the door. As a parliament member, it would be his dream come true if he sat on the throne of the president, especially for a parliament member in exile. The temptation to return to the seat of power was great. Chapter 649, Federation's Ambassador. Your party's firepower left a deep impression on us. Since the despicable empire and mutated humans are eliminated, why don't we redefine the boundaries, each take a step back, and remain at peace? In the conference room beside the palace, Jiang Chen met the ambassador from Federation. So your proposal is? Jiang Chen smiled. With Gan River as the boundary, the territory west of Gan River will belong to Federation and the territory east of Gan River will belong to NAC. The borders will be open with an open trade policy in effect and no customs set in place. The ambassador proposed with a smile. Their terms made Jiang Chen extremely surprised. He previously assumed they would have to engage in intense debate on the negotiation table or be involved in an intense standoff that could even escalate into military conflict, but negotiations went surprisingly smooth. Federation, who already crossed the Gan River, took a step back and was willing to retreat. Jiang Chen's finger tapped the armrest of the chair while he contemplated the real intentions of Federation. But regardless of what they thought, the terms brought by the ambassador gave him no reason to reject them. After a brief silence, he casually said, "Looks like we've reached an agreement." A smile appeared on the ambassador's face. He took half a step back and bowed courteously to Jiang Chen. "It's a pleasure to be able to reach an agreement with your party, Honorable Mr. General." Since they reached an agreement, the two parties signed the agreement that symbolized their friendship. Without staying for much longer, the ambassador took the copy that belonged to them and departed. Once the ambassador left, Jiang Chen looked to Han Zhanhua, who was standing by the side silently. "What do you think? If NAC needs a market and supply base, Federation's proposal satisfies our needs," Han Zhanhua replied. "I share the same perspective as you, although I don't think it's as simple as it looks." Jiang Chen nodded. It didn't take long before Ji Yuking finally reached the arena, but before he stepped into the conference room, the ambassador already left. Jiang Chen had a helpless expression, looking at Ji Yuking, who was gasping for air. "You're late." The Federation ambassador already left. That quickly? You reached an agreement?" Ji Yuking stood up with his back straight and asked Jiang Chen in shock. "Of course, we agreed to set Gan River as the boundary with free trade established. This is the exact agreement." Jiang Chen nonchalantly tossed the agreement they just signed into Ji Yuking's hands. "Unfortunately, you can't be the president. How about being a diplomat?" Ji Yuking scanned through the agreement before putting it down. "This is a trap." "Oh?" Jiang Chen curiously examined Ji Yuking. Although Federation's forces have outstanding abilities, the strongest part of Federation isn't its soldiers. "What is it then?" "It's the merchants," Ji Yuking replied. Jiang Chen almost burst out laughing. Ji Yuking looked at Jiang Chen, puzzled, not understanding why he found it funny. Empire was afraid of Federation's merchants and hence established many rules and boundaries within its market. They increased tariffs and established protection policies to support the economy on the brink of collapse. "Looks like you have hopes to become the president." Jiang Chen didn't bother explaining to Ji Yuking. He just stood and laughed as he patted Ji Yuking on the shoulder. "But I want you to first return to Federation. Only then can you participate in the election." Ji Yuking shook his head and gave Jiang Chen a pleading look. "No, I don't want to go back. They'll kill me. The president won't spare me with his forces behind him." "Don't worry, you won't die." Jiang Chen comforted him. "You're returning as a NAC diplomat. They won't dare to kill you. Also, you've been out here for too long. It won't make sense to kill you to protect the password anymore." As long as the president of Federation wasn't blind, he would see that Fallout Shelter 071 is now under the control of NAC. But Jiang Chen dismissed his comment with irritation. "No buts. If you want to become the president, listen to me or else I'll choose someone else." "What?" Ji Yuking immediately stopped blabbering. "You certainly recognize the situation." Jiang Chen glanced at the guy, paused, then continued. "Once you return to Federation, just do your job as a diplomat. You don't have to do anything, just wait for my orders." Ji Yuking nodded and carefully remembered Jiang Chen's words of caution. "Also, keep an eye out for me on one thing." "What thing?" "That letter. Who sent it to you?" Jiang Chen said. Ji Yuking, with a troubled smile, said, "Didn't I say? It was Dr. Sun. He didn't send it, although it was sent under his name. I swear I didn't lie to you. It's Dr. Sun's handwriting. I delegated people to verify his writing before." Ji Yuking assumed Jiang Chen suspected he was lying. "I know you're not lying to me, but you've been lied to," Jiang Chen said. "The name on the letter may not represent the person who actually sent the letter. He has a clinic and signs how many forms a day? It's not hard to forge his writing. How do you know he didn't write the letter?" Ji Yuking rebutted. "Because I met him and I confirmed that he didn't have the intention of doing that," Jiang Chen said. "Okay, I'll keep an eye out." Ji Yuking nodded. After sending Ji Yuking off, Jiang Chen left the affairs of Qingshan Town to Superintendent Chen Ling and exchanged a few words with the newly appointed director Kai Zhuan. Then he boarded order to return to Golden River Farm. Inside the farm were already a few tractors plowing the land. Bundles of carm saplings were stacked on the side with a few new farmers cooling off on the side. The merchants of 6th Street not only brought capital, they also brought advanced technology. Disregarding everything else, the farm tractors plowing the farm were the products of 6th Street factories. In the near future, NAC technicians would build a communication base station. Once established, Fuking would be included in the credit EP payment system. At the same time, data exchange between Wang Hai could be accomplished through the network. After he arrived at the command post, Zhang Chen found his private force captain, Captain Li Wang, and inquired about the mission he delegated to him. Did you find the Quantum Computer Research Institute? We already confirmed a few suspected targets and I sent the brothers of the private force to search for them. I'll have an accurate reply in 3 days at the most. Excellent. I'm glad I entrusted this task to you. It's my pleasure to share the general's burden. Li Wang saluted him. Zhang Chen nodded. Pleased. I have another thing I want you to do. What is it? Head to the Donggang plantation for me and convince the survivors there to join us. Roger that. Li Wang headed out. Wait. Zhang Chen suddenly stopped him. He stopped and turned around. Anything else I can do? You've been with me for a while, and I'm pleased with your loyalty. But regarding your abilities, I still need to test you. I won't give you any hints in this mission and I don't have any expectations regarding which method you use to convince them. Your actions and the final result will be used as part of the assessment. If you pass the test, you'll become the captain of order. Li Wang's heart trembled uncontrollably as he looked at Zhang Chen with great emotion. He took a deep breath, calmed the excitement in his mind, and eventually said, I definitely won't disappoint you, General. Chapter 650, Donggang Plantation. Donggang Plantation. The scars of battle were beginning to fade. The survivors dug out the bodies of their comrades and buried them on the small hill north of the plantation. On the street outside the barbed wire, zombies tumbled along and wandered around mindlessly. In the days of continuous fire, Empire's sieging forces destroyed their walls multiple times and cut through the barbed wires to lure zombies into the plantation. The battle devolved into chaos between humans and zombies. In the chaos, over 1,000 slaves died. With such a limited amount of ammunition, their ability to limit their casualties to around 1,000 against an actual force showed that the slaves were certainly a force to be reckoned with. Of course, NAC's airstrike also was part of the reason. Out of fear for an airstrike from NAC, Empire's 2nd Division didn't focus all their efforts on launching a full-scale attack. Out of fear for NAC's forces, Empire's 2nd Division chose to retreat north for independence. It was only then that the siege of Donggang Plantation finally ended. Since they didn't know where to go, 1,000 survivors chose to leave while the remaining 7,000 survivors gathered together. They elected a leader who led them to rebuild their home on this piece of land. One morning, an SUV darted into the street and sent a few dumb zombies flying before it came to an abrupt stop in front of the plantation. 2 machine guns on a wall immediately pointed in this direction. Survivors with scarves and rifles walked up to knock on the car window. This place isn't open to the public. Please leave. Li Wang glanced at the muzzles on the wall, took a deep breath, tapped on the door to lower the window. I don't have bad intentions. I represent NAC and I want to see your leader. Li Wang thought these people would courteously invite him in, but the survivor's expression made a 180-degree shift as he examined Li Wang with caution. The stark difference completely caught him off guard. The soldier at the gate pressed on his collar, walked to the side, and spoke with his superior before he quickly returned to the car window. We can take you to see our leader, but we have to search you. Li Wang's eyebrows raised and he was about to go off, but when he thought about Zhang Chen's test for him, he breathed in and suppressed the anger in his mind. Of course, he pushed open the door, walked out, and opened his hands. I swear I don't have any weapons on me. The soldier ignored him and briefly scanned his body. After confirming there were no weapons, he took Li Wang into the plantation. After walking on a muddy road, They arrived in front of a 3-story office building. Li Wang saw the leader of the survivors when he stepped in. His knife-sharp eyes could pierce people's minds and his defined face was tattooed with a slave mark, but from his straight back, Li Wang didn't see the meekness typical of a slave. This isn't an easy character, that was Li Wang's first thought. When the uprising erupted, the spies behind the conflict retreated from the plantation amidst the chaos. No one could provide him with assistance, and the only information he had was from 1 week ago. Aha, let me see who came. The ambassador of Nek. You finally remembered your neighbor. The leader walked up to Li Wang, with his eyes narrowed. He aggressively stared Li Wang down. Tell me your intentions. Li Wang didn't dodge his stare. He paused for a moment before he calmly said, are we not allies? You used us to keep Empire's 2nd Division here and used our blood to pave your victory. Would you refer to this as an alliance? The leader started laughing hysterically and he shrugged. What's next? After you take over the capital, do you plan on taking over the slaves in the capital? You're mistaken. Let me tell you, we won't accept any enslavement from anyone, even if you're powerful enough. The leader lowered his voice. His scratchy voice rang beside Li Wang's ears as the words came out one by one. The pitiful people who just escaped from the shackles of enslavement were more sensitive and more conceited than anyone. While they only had poorly made rifles and a limited amount of ammo, they still believed they could use their faith to defend their freedom. They were sensitive and suspicious of any form of control. They wouldn't listen to anything right now. The missiles of order should wake these people up. That was Li Wang's only thought. We won't do that. Li Wang used his most reasonable voice. But who can promise you won't do that? The leader asked in an exaggerated tone. We have our hands and feet and we can grow mutated fruits and karm tree sap. Why would we join you? We can purchase your mutated fruits and karm tree sap. Federation's market can too. You're not unique. The negotiation was at a stalemate from the beginning, but fortunately, Li Wang detected the problem. Federation came to see you? The leader shrugged and replied with an undeniable expression. Not denying the claim was equivalent to agreeing with it. Li Wang took a deep breath, cleared his thoughts, and calmly said, could you give me 5 minutes? At the command post, Zhang Chen was working. Regarding the growth of NAC in the Hongcheng region, he was strategizing the smaller details regarding the bigger picture of expansion. While the model of 6th Street could be used as a reference, it couldn't be perfectly replicated here and required minor adjustments. Elections, law. This time, the door opened and Wang Zhou walked into the office. Are you busy? Almost done. Why? Zhang Chen dropped the pen in his hand and asked Wang Zhou. Nothing in particular. I just wanted to ask if you've made a decision for the captain. Wang Zhou closed the door behind him. The situation with Hongcheng was stabilized. After the open border agreement with Federation came into effect, NAC managed to successfully establish itself in the area. It was near the end of July. After leaving for 1.5 months, it was time to return at the beginning of August. Zhang Chen said from the beginning that the captain of order would be selected at the end of the conquest. As the general and division commander, Wang Zhou couldn't act as the captain and deputy captain forever. I have someone in mind but I'm undecided. Wang Zhou was relieved when he heard Zhang Chen had a plan. He said with a smile, I thought you forgot about it. Now I feel assured. Enough. You think I would keep you as deputy captain forever? Head back and clean up. It won't be long until you have to return to your 2nd division. Roger.